Welcome everybody back into Nerd Sesh. As always, I'm Carson Breber, alongside me is Logan Camden, and the U.S. may be out of the World Cup, Logan, but the Nerd Sesh Top 50 Players in NBA History series is alive and well, and we are in to the top 20. Now, this is episode 4 of this 5-part series, so if you already missed the first 30 players whose rankings we broke down in depth, you can go back and watch those episodes, but we will recap our list up to this point, Logan. Let's do this rapid fire, but who do you have all the way from 50 to 21?
Affirmative, Mr. Breber, in the 50 spot.
Sir.
Jason Kidd, 49, Russell Westbrook, 48, Big Game James Worthy, 47, Manu Ginobili, 46, the Chris Webber incident, 45, Reggie Minion, 44, Ray Allen, 43, Damian Lillard, 42, Gary Payton, 41, Jimmy Butler, 40, James Harden, 39, Clyde Drexler, 38, Bill Walton, 37, Jason Tatum, 36, Isaiah Thomas, that's Zeke, 35, Karl Malone, 34, Elgin Baylor, 33, Hondo, John Havlicek, 32, Scottie Pippen, 31, David Robinson, and this last episode, 30, Anthony Davis, 29, Luka Doncic, 28, SGA, 27, Kawhi Leonard, 26, Rick Barry, 25, D. Wade, 24, Steve Nash, 23, Charles Barkley, 22, Chris Paul, and 21, Moses Malone.
At number 50, I had Isaiah Thomas, 49, Jimmy Butler, 48, Joel Embiid, 47, Luka Doncic, 46, Bill Walton, 45, Paul Pierce, 44, Ray Allen, 43, Clyde Drexler, 42, Clyde Frazier, 41, George Gervin, number 40, Bob Pettit, 39, Reggie Minion, 38, Jason Kidd, 37, John Stockton, 36, Patrick Ewing, 35, Elgin Baylor, 34, Anthony Davis, 33, SGA, 32, James Harden, 31, Kawhi Leonard, 30, John Havlicek, 29, Scottie Pippen, 28, Moses Malone, 27, Rick Barry, 26, Steve Nash, 25, Dwayne Wade, 24, Charles Barkley, 23, Karl Malone, 22, David Robinson, and 21, my beloved Chris Paul. As you guys can see, our lists have been vastly different. However, I think we might have the exact same players in our respective top 20s. The order is obviously going to be different, but I believe that is true. So interesting that we are reaching something more of a consensus here. With that being said, I will quickly just reiterate my essential criteria for this list. My guiding principle is who I believe gives me the best chance to win the most championships if I have them on my team for their entire career. This is, of course, only up until this point for active players, but it is essentially that championship value, championship impact delivered over a career. With that being said, Logan, why don't you take us into the top 20?
In my 20 spot is a guy very near and dear to my heart. This is where I have one of my dad's favorite players. I have Dr. J here in my 20 spot, and I found Dr. J very hard to rank right before this episode began. I did move him down a few spots. I had him closer to my top 15, and I ultimately decided on him in the 20 spot for a few reasons. I just think everybody above him virtually, I do think peaked a little bit higher. And Dr. J has really good longevity. When we're getting into the top 20, you've got to make some really tough calls. Some of the guys above him, so like some of these guys, I do have a few active players above Dr. J who I just think inarguably peaked higher than Dr. J, and then some of these guys who are his contemporaries and very similar to him just have some gaudy longevity where their peak is just sustained for a really long time, or they're still providing me extra value even as older players. And so 20 may seem low for Dr. J. I thought I was going to have him higher. I just say that to preface the greatness that we are getting into this episode, and we are going to have to make some really, really tough decisions, but Dr. J's awesome. You have to start with his ABA career, where he is one of the greatest ABA players ever. In his ABA career, he was a 3-time scoring champ. He was a 3-time MVP, and he was a 2-time champ. Then when he goes on to the NBA, he's an 11-time All-Star every season of his career. He's a 5-time All-NBA selection and a 1-time MVP, and I just love going back and watching Dr. J. His scoring and his athleticism specifically, like in so many matchups, so many games, he is just head and shoulders above the competition. He is the best athlete on the court. Like, the rim finishing, the vertical athleticism. Like, Dr. J just pops out at you in this era watching him. The grace, the agility, the balance, the touch. Like, when I watch Dr. J play, the interior scoring and what he can do, it's very reminiscent of, like, MJ's kind of grace and balance and athleticism, the way he just goes up into the air and can get over everybody's head and score. And I think that is the first thing that you think of with Dr. J, is that scoring, the athleticism, the grace. But he does provide you value in other areas, the rebounding, the defensive playmaking. He becomes a pretty solid playmaker, not an elite one by any means, but a solid playmaker. But ultimately, like I said, I think he's got good longevity, not gaudy, great longevity as some of these other guys. I think that, honestly, I think everybody above him in this top 20 range does peak higher. That holds him from getting higher. And I think he was one of the best players of his era, but I don't know if he was ever the best player in the NBA. Like, you know, his contemporaries at this time, Magic, Bird, Kareem. Like, I think Dr. J was in that top 5. I think he was in that upper echelon. But I want to give him credit for taking some Sixers teams to the finals before he wins the finals, but I do want to make it clear that, like we were saying about Moses, who I had in my 21 spot, that is an all-time team, and I just want to make clear that I don't want to give him too much credit for being a part of that team, where I think he was the second best player, but that is an all-time champion, again, where I don't want to give him undue credit. You've got Andrew Toney, you've got Mo Cheeks, you've got Bobby Jones, like, that is a team with a lot of great basketball players, a really great infrastructure, and ultimately, I do think Moses was the best player on that individual team. So I do just want that context to be important. I think Dr. J was a top 5, maybe top 3 kind of player of his era, but I don't know if he was ever the best player of his era. Where I look at other guys above him in this range and on this list, I think everybody else kind of makes their debate as the guy. And again, some of these things on the margin, their longevity being a little bit better. I thought I was going to have Dr. J a little bit higher. I think he's an all-time great. I love going back and watching him play. He is such a unique player of his time, and he's really versatile too. But ultimately, I think the 20 spot feels exactly right for Dr. J.
Well, Logan, I have him in the exact same spot. And I think we agree on a lot of the strengths of his case and also some of the reasons that he can't be higher. Like you said, you're talking about 16 star-level seasons between the ABA and the NBA, and we have to value what he did in the ABA because he was the best player in the league 4 or 5 years before coming to the NBA, and I do think he is the second best player of the 70s. I don't think he had the second highest peak. I would give that designation to Bill Walton, but Dr. J pretty much for the entire decade is like a top 3 player on the planet, and I would agree never made a case for being the best guy because Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was walking the earth, but still overall probably gives you a dozen seasons in which he was a top 5 player, and so that is really good longevity when you're talking about that high level impact, and I do think has a very strong two-way impact. Offensively, as you're saying, an elite scorer because he was such a great rim pressure, just the combination of the handle, the agility, the quickness, obviously the vertical ability and the grace at his size. So impressive. He was an elite offensive rebounding forward. He was a transition weapon naturally with the sort of full court athleticism that he had. He was a good passer, not a great passer, but did have that ability to collapse the defense consistently and could make solid reads to create for his teammates there. And then defensively, he was a plus. He was never an elite defensive player. He just never gave that level of effort on a play-to-play basis, but he was a stock machine. He was good at generating steals and blocks. He was a good rebounder. And so you wind up with this guy who is a very strong scorer, a solid passer, a plus defender, a really good rebounder, just a very good all-around forward who was the best player on a lot of really good teams. Like you said, though, I do think we have to come back to just understanding how good the Philly teams of the late 70s and early 80s were, not just because of Moses Malone once he got there, not just because of Dr. J before Moses got there, but really because of the totality of the talent that they had. And I do think we have to give Dr. J a ton of credit for getting those Philly teams to 3 NBA finals before Moses ever even set foot in the door, before, but also even he joined a 46-win team, and then he got them to 50 wins in the NBA Finals the next year in 1977, but he was already joining a very solid infrastructure, and a lot of those Philly teams, they were good offenses, but Dr. J wasn't the sort of offensive engine who was going to single-handedly make you elite on that side of the ball. In several years, their formula was more so these elite collective defenses that Dr. J was a solid part of, and then he made them a good offense. But they also had good supporting offensive pieces. Like, you just look at the supporting cast that he always had. If you look at the first group where you have Doug Collins, who was an all-star, George McGinnis, who was an all-star, and Henry Bibby, and World B. Free, and Daryl Dawkins, and Caldwell Jones, just a lot of quality players. And then, of course, you bring in the Mo Cheeks and Andrew Toney and Bobby Jones group, and Mo Cheeks, such a good two-way point guard. Andrew Toney, one of the most underrated offensive players probably in NBA history. Bobby Jones, one of the greatest defensive players and one of the most underrated defensive greats in NBA history. And so those were elite teams that, yes, were led by Dr. J, and he was a top 3, top 5 player. But again, there was a lot of talent around him. And then you drop Moses Malone onto this 58-win team, and of course they go out there and they win the title. And then even after that, you get Barkley in Dr. J's last few years. And so I just think those Philly supporting casts are very underrated historically. I look at the 83 team, and I think it's one of the most talented top 5s in NBA history. And they just had a lot of help for Dr. J throughout his time there. Like, you look over the years in his Philly career, they won 67% of their games with him. They were really damn good, of course. They also won 64% of their games without him. They went 42-24 in games without Dr. J. That includes going 13-4 without him before Moses even joined the team. So clearly, he was a very impactful two-way player, but he was not an elite offensive engine. He was not an elite defensive player. He was very good at a lot of things, but ultimately not singularly impactful enough at his peak to get any higher on my list. But the peak is very good. The longevity is very good. And that's why he is still in my top 20. So let's see if we keep agreeing, Logan. Who do you have at number 19?
Yeah, I ultimately just couldn't have this guy lower than Dr. J because of his dominance and his peak. This is one of the active players that I was alluding to. I have Giannis Antetokounmpo here in my 19 spot. And the interesting thing about Giannis to me is similar, not exactly similar, but kind of the metamorphosis I was talking about with Kawhi Leonard's career. The metamorphosis of Giannis and the different phases of Giannis and how dominant he has been throughout his career, right? Early on with Giannis when he's an all-star, 2017, 2018, 2019, the growth into superstardom, right? This is a more defensively slanted transition, rebounding monster version of Giannis. And then later on, you get the more offensively polished version where he is transcended into this really elite playmaker and sort of unstoppable downhill force. And right, he's always had that power element of his game, but like the last 5 seasons, you know, I look at Giannis and I think he is really rounded out and completed his offensive game where he is fully maximizing his ability to get downhill, fully weaponizing his collapsing defenses and kicking out, and really tapping into and ultimately realizing his potential as a playmaker, right? And where he's trading off some of being a really impactful defensive player for being a more dominant offensive player, right? Just because he's taking on more of that load. The most difficult thing I found to rank, in my opinion, Carson, with Giannis and how high ultimately he should be in this range, because I think this is the range for him, this 20 to 11 range. The things that I was struggling to balance out here was the availability concerns, the playoff rigidity, right, where some of the Miami Heat building the wall, the limitations of him as a over-the-top kind of jump shooter and pull-up shooter, and I don't want to say longevity at this stage in his career, because Giannis right now, this is like 10 years of superstardom for Giannis. You know, that's what he's going on right now. But what I'm also struggling to balance, and this is an interesting theme that we're going to get to of some of these other superstars in this range. With that, it's also hard to ignore the incompetence, the ineptitude, and the bad luck of the Milwaukee Bucks. And that's what I'm struggling to straddle, this kind of fence of Giannis has had some of these playoff shortcomings where he hasn't even been available in the playoffs for the Bucks, but he's also the sole reason that the Bucks are even in the playoffs because of how bad this roster has been around him. The fact that they pivot from this really old roster ultimately too late, moving off of Holiday and Middleton and Brook Lopez, and they try to make this really quick pivot to Damian Lillard, which doesn't work out at all because they don't complement one another, and Damian Lillard gets injured and can't even be on the floor, and yet the Bucks are still really good because Giannis is so clearly still a top 3 to 5 player on the planet, and then they make the Miles Turner deal, and that sinks their boat for this last year. So that's one of the most difficult things to me about ranking Giannis because he is such a unique player, but ultimately, this is where I ended up at this 19 spot where Giannis still has more room to grow. He can still get higher in this hierarchy with what he could do here in Miami in the later stages of his career, but also recognizing that the fact that Giannis hasn't had some of this playoff success over the last few years, I kind of have trouble putting it all at his feet when he is still the sole reason that Milwaukee is keeping their head above water and not one of the worst teams in basketball. So I still think Giannis can climb higher on this list. I don't think it's unreasonable to expect him to knock on the door or climb into the top 15 range, but ultimately I do recognize that Giannis still has some more work to do to get into that range. He's still got some meat on the bone. I'd say 3 to 5 years more until I'd be willing to say that he belongs in that range. So for right now, I think Giannis can get higher on this list. I've got him in the 19 spot.
I also have him at number 19, Logan. We are talking about one of the greatest regular season floor raisers ever. We are talking about one of the great two-way giants in the history of this sport. Maybe a top 3 transition player in NBA history, probably the GOAT driver and finisher in NBA history. I mean, it truly is preposterous when you're talking about a guy who can score 17, 18 points per game in the restricted area and make 75, 80% of his field goals in that range. And we're talking about somebody who is mostly initiating from the perimeter. He really is one of the most unfathomable athletes in NBA history to be 6'11", as explosive as he is, as agile as he is, with the ball handling skill that he has, with the power that he has. His single superpower of his ability to just repeatedly barrel his way, force his way to the rim, and finish through contact, and finish in traffic, and get to the free throw line at this obscene rate. It's one of the greatest superpowers in NBA history. He is also one of the greatest rebounders when you're talking about a non-center that we've ever seen. He's also one of the most versatile defenders that we've ever seen when you're talking about Giannis at his defensive peak 2019 to 2021. This was a guy who was very matchup versatile because of his unique agility for being a near 7-footer, but his greatest value was as a help defender, where he was truly one of the greatest secondary rim protectors we've ever seen, alongside Brook Lopez, of course, who was a great defensive anchor. Giannis as a roamer was perhaps the most destructive player in the NBA for a couple years. I remember at that time, he was holding people 14, 15% below their typical field goal percentage at the rim routinely. And he was also good at generating steals, but just this absolutely monstrous roaming off-ball defender. And then, as you said, has grown into a really high-level playmaker and has been quite a good passer for a while now, but especially over these last few seasons has just continued to level up in that regard. And so you have this guy who is this massive volume scorer, super efficiently, dominant rebounder, high-level playmaker, high-level defender. It's pretty easy to see how Giannis winds up carrying one of the biggest loads when you're just talking about how much he is asked to do on both sides of the ball in NBA history. And again, he has been one of the great regular season floor raisers we've ever seen. From 2017 to 2025, the Bucks won 65% of their games with Giannis. They were consistently atop the Eastern Conference until, as you said, they made a number of really incompetent decisions, allowing the supporting cast around him to just deteriorate, and then the Dame thing was a disaster, and thank God he's out of Milwaukee now because it was just headed further and further south. They only won 50% of their games without him, so a substantial difference there, and overall, over those 9 years, Giannis is giving you 28.5 points a game, 11 rebounds, 6 assists on plus 5% relative true shooting with elite defense and a plus 9 on off swing in that time. And then we look at this past season, and it's actually the best Giannis has ever been offensively. I mean, just the production on a per minute basis is absolutely unfathomable. Obviously, he didn't play most of the season with injury, but even this year, they were 17 and 19 with him on the court. They were 15 and 31 without him. They were still somehow winning the Giannis minutes, and they were disastrous when he was off the court. So that is, to me, the strongest part of Giannis's case, just the fact that dropping him on a team, you can put very limited talent around him. In terms of the regular season, he doesn't really need a lead ball handling guard. He pretty much just needs shooting all around. And in recent years, he has shown that he can take that formula. He can dominate that ball. And with his ability to constantly pressure the basket, to make those high level reads, he can lead you to be an elite offense. And then also defensively, not as impactful at this point, but at his best defensively was this absolute defensive giant who was also a very good offensive engine. But I think the knocks with Giannis do come down to the playoffs, the availability in recent years, and the longevity. But I want to start with the playoffs because that's the one like basketball thing here. In terms of playoff offense, it has always been clunky with Giannis. His teams in the playoffs have a -1 relative offensive rating with him on the court. So in Giannis minutes, they've been a slightly below league average playoff offense. That's a very rare thing to see from one of these bona fide superstars whose primary value is on the offensive end. Now, the Bucks have had a lot of elite playoff defenses, especially 2021. They were one of the great modern playoff defenses, and Giannis was a huge part of that. But that year, the offense was still clunky, and I definitely put a lot of that on Chris Middleton being inconsistent, although he also had some great moments. Drew Holiday just really struggling offensively throughout that run. That team had spotty shooting, but also there have been the issues in Giannis's game offensively in the half court. He is a high turnover player, averaging 3.5 turnovers a game in the playoffs. As you said, just the complete lack of any sort of over-the-top shot making has been an issue because teams have been able to, at times, really pack the paint, and Giannis can just struggle against those looks because he doesn't really have the counter, and his scoring efficiency has dropped accordingly by 3.5 percentage points in terms of true shooting in the playoffs. And then he is quite ball dominant. And that is kind of the weird thing about building around Giannis. It's okay, amazing. We have this 7-foot battering ram who can be a point forward and can carry this huge load if we just spread out and put shooting around him. But also, given that his playoff offense isn't as valuable as his regular season offense, you do want like some really high level perimeter shot makers and playmakers who you can pair alongside him and whose games he complements. And Giannis has just never really played a very complementary style with his guards. We all thought, oh, Dame, this is going to be incredible. You've got one of the all-time great pull-up three-point shooters. You pair him with this all-time great downhill force and what Giannis is going to be able to do off the short roll for him and as a screener. And he never bought into that role, and he's really never done that sort of big man stuff offensively. Like, for all of the insane athletic physical gifts that he has, he's always been a good offensive rebounder, not a dominant offensive rebounder. He's never been that willing to be a role man. So you are putting the ball in his hands a ton and trying to figure out how you can work around his flaws, and pairing him with a high-level playmaking guard hasn't necessarily been as fruitful as we would have hoped because of some of Giannis's rigidity. And so that's where I think, even if we are talking about Dr. J, again, I don't think is an elite offensive engine, but I do think is somebody who led to better playoff offenses than Giannis has. But I also feel better, actually, about Giannis's ability to deliver in terms of playoff offense now than ever before. I thought he had a dominant offensive series against the Pacers in 2025, and that's a team that he has just absolutely eaten alive. They had nothing for him, but I do think he is the best he's ever been offensively. He's the best as a playmaker. I think his shot selection is the best, right? He's just cut the three out of his game. the mid-range, we saw it some in 2025. It kind of went away this year. I don't really care about that, but I do think he is just the most polished, most dominant offensively he's ever been, but his defense isn't what it used to be. He's just a plus on that side of the ball. He's not an elite defensive player anymore. And so in the playoffs, I do think we have seen some flaws with Giannis, even though he was a dominant two-way player on a championship team. The availability in recent years also is a knock, and this is related with the longevity, right? If my criteria is, okay, who gives me the best chance to win the most championships, part of delivering that value, part of bringing that impact is being on the court. And Giannis has struggled to stay healthy, particularly late into recent seasons. 2023, he gets banged up, can't play that whole series as the Bucks get upset as the 1 seed. 2024, he misses the playoffs entirely with injury. This year, he missed more than half the games. So overall, it's not like throughout his career this has really been an issue. It's more so just in recent years. And then, as you said, he's still just adding to the longevity. And this is kind of where we have to hold back a bit with all of the active players. We do have 13 years of Giannis. We do have, like you're saying, pretty much a decade of superstardom at this point, 8 years of MVP level impact when he's on the court. But if you compare that to some of these other guys who are giving you 15 plus years of star level impact, it is still something that holds me back from putting Giannis higher. And let's come back to Chris Paul for a moment, Logan, because I didn't talk about him enough last episode. Like, I did really think about that. I was like, absolutely, Giannis has peaked higher than Chris Paul. There's no question about that. I do think there's a level of two-way dominance with him where he could just be so physically imposing on both sides of the ball that he was kind of undeniable in that 2021 run. Even with some of his offensive flaws, that really was a dominant run, of course, especially a dominant final series. Chris Paul, even at his best, could not reach that level of two-way impact. But also, it's like, I just get more real quality years from Chris Paul at this point. And so does the peak with Giannis really outweigh the fact that CP3 is giving me another half dozen really good seasons? I was conflicted on that. I'm not sure. Ultimately, they fall in a very similar range for me, but I will lean on the side of the more dominant player at his best here. And I do think that's kind of a theme of the top 20. These are players who peaked extremely high. And even though I have valued longevity a lot on this list, I do think there's a threshold you reach as a player where, like, the championship value you are adding in these individual seasons, the chance that you give me when you're at your best is just so substantial that I have to have you here. And Giannis, even if I'm a little lower on the playoffs, I mean, when you're talking about regular season peaks, he's closer to the top 10 just because it was incredible his ability to buoy those Bucks teams on both sides of the ball at his best. And I still think Giannis is an absolute monster. I can't wait to see what he does in Miami. I think a lot of people have forgotten how fucking great he still is.
Well, yeah, I don't know too many people that are interested in watching Bucks games. You know?
Brutal.
It's going to be a little bit of a strange fit, but like I am of the belief that when you have an opportunity to acquire a player that, you know, is at the level that Giannis is still at, you go and do it. And the Heat gave up a lot of rotation guys, but I think you do that 10 times out of 10, man. And like I said, I mean, Giannis isn't done. Like, he's going to have to be available for Miami in the playoffs. He's going to have to do something of significance for them in a team context to climb higher, but I wouldn't rule it out, man. And yeah, I think a lot of people have forgotten, man. I think Giannis is kind of getting a little taken for granted. I'm pumped. Just more so than anything else to see him with a franchise that is competent above everything else.
Yeah, I mean, just to reiterate what he did when he was on the court this year, you're talking about a guy who per 36 minutes is giving you over 34 points, 12 rebounds, 7 assists. He's doing that on 66% true shooting with a plus 14 on-off swing. Like, that is clearly, indisputably a top 5 player on the planet. We just need to see him out there on the court for an entire season and in a better situation. And I'm hoping that we get to see both of those things this year. We're certainly going to see him in a better situation because Giannis has been failed by the Bucks. I'm glad you said that. He has absolutely been failed. But in terms of his individual impact, we're talking about a top 20 player of all time already. So, Logan, I mean, let's see if we could just keep it going. Who do you have at 18?
Maybe we can. I have another active player that I was alluding to here in this spot. I have Nikola Jokic in my 18 spot, and Just to start with the Giannis versus Jokic thing, because I'm sure this will be a debate to some of our listeners, and I understand why. Like, a lot of people, I think, would make the Giannis two-way argument versus a guy like Jokic when you're talking about a team roster construction thing. I actually think the roster construction point, and again, this is up for debate, I would lean Jokic, and for a few reasons. One, you made a really good point about Giannis, too, that I don't really have to consider as much with Jokic. The availability point, like, these guys, I think, are a lot more easily comparable than some of the other debates that we're going to have versus legends, because they do have career overlap. They have been two of the best players on the planet over the last decade, right? So I think this comparison's a little bit easier. One, I think Jokic has been, again, a little bit more available than Giannis. I think, two, his playoff scoring and playoff game have translated more than Giannis. We've seen the three ball come and go a little bit with Jokic, the scoring in certain matchups, specifically against Gobert. And I think we've seen teams figure him out a little bit more in figure out defensive coverages to throw at Jokic to be a little bit more effective over the past few seasons. All that being said, I think Jokic's game has translated a little bit better to the playoffs than Giannis, and he's been more available. But to get back to the roster construction point, I do fundamentally think it's a little bit easier to put a winning team and a contender around Jokic for a few reasons. One, Jokic being this high above everything else, I think there's so many little components to Jokic's game that get him on this list. Above everything else, it is the fact that Nikola Jokic is an all-time amplifier and just a brilliant offensive processor and decision maker. And like, when I think about starting a team with Nikola Jokic, obviously, I think back to the championship run when I think it's an all-time title run from him. The three-point shooting, the playmaking, the intermediate scoring, the shooting touch, the rebounding. Like, that to me is still an all-time offensive run. It is an all-time playoff run in general. The Murray-Jokic two-man game, him amplifying all of his teammates, MPJ, Aaron Gordon, like, that's where you have to start. I think him mowing down three really good defenders in that run, too. Gobert, Swiss cheese. Bam Adebayo, Swiss cheese. Anthony Davis, Swiss cheese. Like, Jokic just mowed them down. And so people are going to try to take away from that playoff run with the, oh, you didn't beat a 50-win team, all this nonsense. It's like, look at the players that he is going through during this playoff run, his individual matchups. Like, you can talk about the records. I think the context of that season is important. And, like, those guys were available in the playoffs. Like, you can't make that argument to me when those guys were out there on the court and Jokic just mowed them down, handled business. But I even think back to what Jokic was doing when guys were injured on his teams, when he is trotting out 50-win, 40-plus win teams that are competitive in the playoffs with, like, Austin Rivers and Monte Morris and Facundo Campazzo. And I bring those guys up just to say that Jokic is giving me value as a floor raiser where he can take these units with role players and take them to regular season success and make them competitive in the playoffs against really good teams. But he can also go against the best of the best and amplify his star teammates. And it translates in both areas as a ceiling raiser and as a floor raiser in the playoffs to me. And I just think that context is important. So he's giving me the best of both worlds. And overall, compared to a guy like Giannis, I just think his playoff skill set has translated better, and he is more of a problem to deal with offensively. With that, I do think the defensive point is important. I think Jokic is probably one of the more defensively limited players up this high. It's not unique to him. I have another player in this top 20 that is similarly kind of ineffective like a guy like Jokic. I think Jokic probably peaked higher than him, but that guy has absurd longevity. Again, that's where we're doing this balancing act where I still think Jokic has a chance to climb higher into the top 15 kind of players on this list. Again, that's where the longevity balancing act comes into play, where he's not finished. But I do think the defensive point is a limiting factor to why Jokic already wouldn't be a little bit higher. That's like 2 to 3 spots higher. Moving forward with Jokic, I do think he can crack this top 15. I think the questions for him Is his scoring going to translate to the way it did in some of his earlier runs? Is his three ball going to be there the way it was during his run? Like, is Jokic going to be a 30% three-point shooter, or is he going to be a 38, 39, 40% three-point shooter? Is his scoring going to translate the way it did in that one playoff run into the later stage of his career? I think these questions are important moving forward with Jokic and just how high he can climb into these legendary conversations. But as it stands right now, I feel pretty confident. Like with Jokic's all-time offensive peak, with the floor-raising job that he can do with just a bunch of scrubs around him, and then the absolute ceiling that he provides me as an offensive number one in the playoffs, I am confident in already having him this high. But like I said with Giannis, this is still an active guy. I wholeheartedly think he can crack the top 15, but that's why I feel comfortable right now with him in the 18 spot.
I have Jokic at number 16, so we do differ just slightly. Interestingly, he and Giannis, I both have in essentially the exact same spots that I did 3 years ago, and I think just there are some things that have changed in my basketball philosophy since then. The biggest thing that is probably the difference between that list and this list is how much I'm valuing longevity, and so that's where I was probably a little bit higher on those guys a little bit sooner because I valued the peaks a bit more when we did that list a few years ago. But also, I think Jokic is a really interesting player to talk about right now because I do think when you're talking about the regular season, this is the greatest offensive player we've ever seen. But I think when we talk about the playoffs, if you look at these last three runs, each time around in some way, Jokic has left a little bit something to be desired. And especially this year, hasn't quite played up to that regular season standard. But I do just want to emphasize how ridiculously high the regular season standard is, because I do think Nikola Jokic is the greatest regular season offensive player we've ever seen. Since 2020, in the regular season, he gives you 26, 12, and 9 on plus 8% relative true shooting. He has a plus 15.5 on off swing. He's leading his team to a plus 9 relative offensive rating in his minutes. They are a negative 5.2 relative offense without him. So you're talking about more than a 14-point swing in terms of their offensive rating with him on compared to off it. That is just unfathomable. Overall, he leads them to better than a plus 10 net rating when he's on the court. So they've been an elite team with him, and they have pretty much sucked without him, right? We see that when we look at the minutes with him on compared to when he's off. We see that when we look at the games over the last decade. They win 64% of their games with him. They win just 43.7% of their games without him. And his career on-off swing of plus 12.7 is the best in recorded history. It is better than Kevin Garnett. It is better than Steph Curry, better than LeBron James, better than anybody else when you're talking about the play-by-play era, so since 1997. And so the impact that we have seen from this guy is absolutely monstrous. And I do think in terms of the regular season, he's the easiest player, I would say, to build a dominant offense around because he does so many things at a high level, and particularly because he does such outlier things as a big man. Like Jokic, more so than any other player in NBA history, is both an all-time great creator and play finisher. And that is just such an incredibly exceptional combination because this is a guy who you give the ball in the post and he is exceedingly difficult to stop one-on-one because he's one of the strongest players in the NBA. He has some of the best paint footwork we've ever seen. One of the craftiest post players with literal GOAT paint touch. This is a guy who year after year can make 65% of his shots inside the paint, outside the restricted area. So those hooks, those little turnarounds are just so extremely effective, and he can bully his way into deep position and get you with an up fake. And he is overwhelmingly effective there as a scorer. He is also, of course, one of the greatest passers we've ever seen, and out of the post is the greatest passer that we've seen. So if you double team him, you are very much doing so at your own risk because he has eyes in the back of his head. He can make every pass given his size. He is so creative. He can put such velocity on the ball and deliver passes from so many different angles. And so that is the foundation of his elite creation, the post-up game, but then he does also have the ability to handle for you, right? We've seen him run inverted pick and roll with great effect, and so he can be the engine as the creator for really elite offense, which is an expectation, of course, of these all-time great offensive players, but what makes him unique is also the ability to be so valuable as an offensive rebounder, so valuable as a screener, so valuable as a hub you run handoffs through, and then the overall off-ball scoring with him, the ability to beat you as a jump shooter from mid-range or from beyond the arc, the scoring off the roll where, again, he can get to these floaters and he makes them at layup efficiency, or if he gets all the way to the rim, he's got elite efficiency there too because he's so incredible with the touch and he's so strong. The off-screen game with him, the cutting, like he just does so many complementary things on top of being this tier 1 offensive engine. That combination makes him such an impactful, such an efficient offensive player who you can utilize in so many different ways. I think we have seen him reach just absurd heights as a scorer, and I do consider him one of the top 3 passers and processors offensively in NBA history. So the combination of scoring, playmaking, creation, play finishing, doing all the little things, dominating on the interior, being a really strong perimeter offensive player that he's put together, it's just absolutely insane. And in the regular season, like, it's just legitimately unstoppable. And so that is the greatest strength for Jokic's case. And also the fact that we have seen him do it in the regular season, really with whoever you put out there with him. As you said, I mean, 2022 to me is one of the most remarkable seasons of Jokic's career because of what he did with Jamal Murray out for the entire season and with Michael Porter Jr. out for essentially the entire season, still leading that team to a +7 relative offensive rating when he was on the court. Just incredible stuff. And overall, since 2020, when he plays without Jamal Murray, the Nuggets win 63% of their games. And that's a big sample size because Jamal has missed a lot of time. That's 160 games. They're still playing at better than a 50-win pace. They have almost a +7 relative offensive rating in all of the minutes that Jokic has played without Jamal Murray. So he still leads to elite regular season offense even without his co-star. He's done it without the elite spot-up shooter in MPJ. He's done it without his versatile dunker spot threat and transition buddy and now improved spot-up shooter Aaron Gordon. Like, he amplifies all of these guys so substantially. He makes their lives so much better if it is feeding an Aaron Gordon in the dunker spot. If it is obviously all that he does with his roll gravity and his screening and his playmaking, enhancing a Jamal Murray. Obviously enhances a spot-up shooter like Michael Porter Jr., getting him really high-quality looks. Like, he's made all of those guys so much better, and without any one of them, he has still led to elite regular season offense, and he's been doing it for quite a while now. I mean, this is an extremely high peak that he has sustained where I think he had a 5-year run as best player in the world. And I think there's a couple years where that's arguable, but I believed he was the best player in basketball all the way from 2021 to 2025. I felt he was the most impactful because the offense was just so absurd. The impact on that side of the ball was so monumental. And then I keep on talking about the regular season because I do have a couple playoff criticisms I want to get to, but I do also want to make sure we all remember that in 2023, he did have what I believe is the greatest offensive playoff run ever, where he averaged 30 points, 13.5 rebounds, 9.5 assists on almost +7% relative true shooting while leading his team to a +7.5 relative offensive rating when he was on the court. Like, he absolutely mowed through that playoff field, as you're saying, just destroyed some really good defenders. The jump shooting was remarkable. The post scoring was unstoppable. The touch scoring was unstoppable. The playmaking was brilliant. The rebounding was dominant. Like, all of that came together so perfectly in that run, and he reached a level of offensive impact that I do think is the best we've seen in a single run. But over the course of his peak years, the playoff offense hasn't translated quite the same as it has in the regular season or as it did in that 2023 run. And specifically, if we look at the last 3 years, that's where we've seen some cracks in the armor. I always think it's important to acknowledge how much of this I believe has to do with him facing insane defenses. If it is Rudy Gobert and the Minnesota Timberwolves, you're talking about arguably the best defensive player of this generation in Gobert, along with some elite point of attack defenders who have eaten alive his little buddy Jamal Murray. And Murray's playoff drop over the last 3 years has been a big problem for the Nuggets offense that also has to be mentioned. Or if it's in 2025 going up against the Oklahoma City Thunder, one of the very greatest defenses we've ever seen, with just a completely unparalleled level of speed and their ability to cause chaos and force turnovers and double and just completely overwhelm you athletically. Like, he has gone up against some truly great defenses, but also our expectation is that the great offensive players and the great offenses have to win out in those matchups, at least sometimes. And 3 straight years, Jokic and the Nuggets have gotten got by those super athletic, physical, high-level defenses. And overall, since 2020 in the playoffs, Jokic is giving you 28, 12, and 8. Like, the volume is still massive, of course. Plus 4% relative true shooting. The scoring efficiency is still very good, but it's not the GOAT level efficiency he gives you in the regular season. And the turnovers tick up a little bit, 3.5 turnovers a game. And the offensive impact in terms of him leading to elite team offense has not been quite the same. Again, this is a guy with the GOAT on-off swing in the regular season. In the playoffs, he's only leading to like a +3 relative offense when he's on the court. He's only improving his team's net rating by a few points when he's on the court. And I do think there are some flaws to his playoff offense that I didn't foresee, because there was a time when I said, I think Jokic just is the best offensive player ever. I think it's true in the regular season. I don't think it's true overall when you consider the playoffs. Part of that is, as you mentioned, the 3-ball dipping a bit. Now, he still shot 37% from 3 overall. And we have to remember, there was a time when actually it was like, yeah, whenever the playoffs come around, Jokic just shoots the shit out of it from 3, like he did in 2023. In the last 3 years, that hasn't been the case, though, and he's become more reliant on that shot against these defenses that are going to pack the paint, that are going to send multiple bodies at him repeatedly, that are going to make life harder on him on the interior. He does become a little bit more prone if you're doubling out of the post constantly, if you are swarming him off the roll. He just wants to get some easy offense from beyond the 3-point line, but it hasn't been easy offense for him in these playoffs. I do think we've also seen him have some turnover issues against these really athletic defenses. I think we've seen that there are limitations to how he can be used as a ball handler in a playoff setting. It's like, oh my God, we have this point center, and he obviously is a very unique perimeter talent for being a center, but in the playoffs, like, he's not somebody who can bring the ball up the floor against these high pressure defenses, which is maybe a crazy thing to expect of a center, but because Jamal Murray has also struggled to bring the ball up the court against those high-pressure defenses, Jokic has been asked to do that at times, and it's just not really a viable thing. But I think specifically it is his athletic limitations. The fact that he is just literally not quick in his movements that can allow him at times to be overwhelmed by these extremely fast, extremely athletic defenses. And I do think, even though Jamal Murray has been really bad in the playoffs over these last few years, like, you do see how important it is that you do pair Jokic with a ball handler and perimeter shot maker like Murray, ideally a better version of that. But the playoff minutes for Jokic without Murray have been rough. So again, I think it's important to acknowledge how insane the defensive competition that he's faced has been to expose these little flaws that exist in his offensive game, and also just like how high the bar for him is when we're talking about 28, 12, and 8 on good efficiency, still leading to good playoff offense against really good defenses. And we're like, man, that's disappointing, but it is disappointing. And it does matter because, again, his case for being as high as he is on this list or even higher is predicated upon this GOAT level offense, and it hasn't been that. The playoff offense with Jokic hasn't been the literal GOAT offense that it is in the regular season, and the reason that matters is because, as you're saying, he is a mediocre defender, and sometimes he's a bit better than that defensively, sometimes he's a bit worse than that defensively. I think in the 2023 title run, he was a bit better than that defensively. I thought he was very active playing up at the level. I thought his positioning was excellent. His defensive IQ really shined through his hands, his ability to force turnovers, and he was a part of a really good playoff defense that won the title. So we have to acknowledge that that is possible with Jokic on your team when you're talking about the team build. He had a run where he had, in my opinion, the GOAT offensive run and was also a solid defender on a really good team defense. But then we've also seen like the playoffs this year against Minnesota, where his complete lack of rim protection and his slow-footedness in space, if he is not really active, if he is not really giving you maximum effort defensively, he can absolutely be attacked and exploited. And so ultimately he is maybe the player whose defense you feel like you have to work around the most in the top 20. I think he does more positive things than a couple other guys, but I also think he probably does more glaring negative things when you're just talking about the importance of the position defensively, him being a center. But still, I think we've just seen it with Jokic, and I don't want to move past, because we've seen a couple of these playoff flaws, the fact that in terms of the regular season, this guy's absolutely a top 10 player in terms of peak that we've seen. And it's interesting because, like, I think I've said that about a few guys, or at least I said it where I think Giannis is closer to that. I think Shea is close to that. Jokic is there. You can't overlook the impact and how monstrous it has been. But ultimately, some of the playoff offensive stuff not being quite the same, the mediocre defense, and then the fact that, like Giannis, he is still 31 years old. That's why he's not higher for me. I think his peak does rank higher than this, but even though we've gotten, again, a lot of elite seasons out of him, a lot of MVP level seasons, we're comparing him to guys whose careers have been completed, and so they just have more quality seasons on that front, and that's why I put them above Jokic.
I mean, I think you did a really good job of breaking down like just how special of an offensive player that Jokic is. I think that's the biggest selling point, and I don't know. I mean, I think that people have grown to appreciate that. I'm waiting on what's next, man. I can't lie. Like, Jokic has set such a ridiculously high standard for himself. I think that is really important to hammer home. But like, I just want to reemphasize that when I say that I guess I have been a little bit disappointed with him. How much help do you really think that, like, how would you rate, like, what the Nuggets have put around him over these past few seasons, like, as a team build?
Poorly. I think it's not what Giannis has been through post-2021. I think Giannis got absolutely fucked, but also the Bucks haven't been nearly as good as the Nuggets. Like, obviously, the stat that was going around until this year is that he had never played with an all-star or an all-defense level player. Now, Jamal Murray has delivered all-star level value in the playoffs in, like, 2020 and 2023, but I do think it matters. Again, I know people are like, oh, the Jokic on-off stuff is inflated by the fact that they always have shitty backup centers. But the reality is they've always been disastrous in the non-Jokic minutes. And they have been awesome when Jokic plays without Jamal Murray, awesome when he plays without Gordon, awesome when he plays without MPJ. And if you look at the other side of things, they have struggled when Jamal or MPJ or Aaron Gordon are out there without Nikola Jokic. So I do think it's not like we're looking at David Robinson of the early 90s here in terms of his team failing him. It's not like we're looking at Akeem of the late 80s, right? Those are some of the instances I think of boy, those guys really just did not have the talent around them. I think Jokic has had more talent around him than that, but you can't overlook the fact that they are repeatedly significantly losing the minutes when he is off the court and dominating the minutes when he is on the court. And he does that every single year. Again, if my criteria is impact, how much better do you make your team? Jokic in the regular season has a margin there that nobody else has ever had before. And I don't think that means he is the most impactful regular season player ever, because I would still take some guys who just give me more of a like two-way dominant formula, right? Like LeBron James, who's also a tier 1 offensive engine and a much better defensive player, or Michael Jordan in that same vein. But the impact with Jokic is still absolutely monstrous. And I do think right now, people might be a little bit low on him. Jokic discourse has been interesting because it's like the offensive production is just so overwhelming that like people were starting to put him in top 5 all-time conversations. And even as a huge Jokic glazer over the years, I was always like, no, we got to chill with all that. And now I feel like it's sort of gone the opposite direction because the playoffs this year were so ugly. I don't think he's the best player in the world right now. I do think he was the best player in the world for 5 years, though. And that's something that just not many players can claim, and not many players can claim the level of impact that he's had.
I will say, I think that's one of the things that I need to get better at, not being so much of a prisoner in the moment.
Well, I was a prisoner in the moment, too. I said that he was the best offensive player in terms of peak ever. But I've always been lower on Jokic's defense than some. Because I think there are some people who were irrationally high on his defense because, like, their defense always being better with him on the court. I do think that speaks to just a failing of the backup center situation. It's not like,
definitely.
oh yeah, Jokic makes teams better defensively. It's more so like, no, the Nuggets just suck defensively when he's off the court because they have really bad defensive lineups when he's off the court. And that's the story of that side of the ball. However, the fact that, he's improving their offensive rating by more than 14 points over the last 7 years, like, that is just absurd. And I think there's no denying that he's in that top tier of offensive engines ever. And again, I mean, I'm just pulling it up here. Since 2020, the minutes when Jokic is on without Jamal Murray, they're a +8 net team. When Murray is on with Jokic off, they're a -4 net team. When Jokic plays without Aaron Gordon, they're a +8 net team. When Gordon plays without Jokic, they're a -3 net team. When Jokic plays without Gordon or Murray, you're still looking at a +6 net team. Like, this is where I talk about when you contextualize the help, like, he really has carried these teams in a special way for a good chunk of time now.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, I think for a lot of players up this high, I think that's one of the most interesting parts of the calculus is taking in the rosters that they had around them and, like, how responsible they are for how far their teams got and how much blame and how much how much blame they deserve and how much props they deserve for either bringing their team up or letting them down. And Jokic is one of the most interesting cases of that, but that also applies to the next guy that we're going to talk about, certainly.
Interesting. Yeah, I agree with what you said there, and I just want to reiterate, like, that's such a big thing that I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to isolate the individual player's impact. That's why we're not counting rings here, because it's like, yeah, Jokic and Giannis have won, but I think both of them clearly have been unfortunate, less fortunate than the average top 20 player when you look at the surroundings. And so they absolutely still belong in this company. I think both of them have the opportunity to climb higher, but obviously the window for them winning championships, it's not closed. But just when you look at what's happening with the Thunder, the Spurs, and I mean, just again, a lot of teams are constantly getting better in the NBA, and so that is the bar that you have to live up to, and that bar has gotten higher for both these guys now in their 30s. So we'll see if they ever climb the mountain again, but they don't necessarily have to like cement their status here or climb on this list. It's really about what they do individually, and that's where I think both of them, again, can get a little bit sold short if you just look at championships or what have you. So I'm going to move on to my number 18 here, Logan. This is where I have Dirk Nowitzki. And him versus Jokic is interesting because clearly the longevity favors Dirk. I do think the difference in peak is substantial enough for me to have Jokic above him, but that is a conversation that I'm definitely open to, and I think they're obviously very close. The thing with Dirk is he gives you 15 to 16 years of star-level value, and even though he was a limited passer, quite a limited passer, he was still an elite offensive engine. Like from 2001 to 2011, he's leading his team to a +7 relative offensive rating when he's on the court. They were a -3 relative offense without him. So a massive offensive impact, massive difference in team performance with him on the court compared to off it there. And I do think he is one of the 10 most valuable scorers in NBA history. I had him in my top 10 scoring peaks when we did that episode. And I think what you have to understand with Dirk is, first of all, the versatility as a scorer is so incredible. The fact that this is a guy who was, in my opinion, the best isolation scorer of this era, just an absolutely ridiculous combination of agility for his size, underrated driving ability and physicality and strength, and was really a massive free throw generator, but then also, of course, had this ridiculous mid-range shot making and the pump fakes, the footwork, the craft was incredible as a legit 7-footer. So the face-up isolation post-up scoring was just elite. I mean, consistently elite efficiency at massive volume there. And so he could be such a great foundation for an offense in that way, but then also was a really good play finisher, was somebody who was a super effective shooter off the catch, coming off screens, and could launch some of those quick off-ball attacks playing off of that, a really good pick and pop big. And so he is somebody who, in terms of scoring, both could create for himself at a really high level and also was a really good play finisher. And as significant as anything, I mean, the spacing value that he brought to a team as a 7-footer at this time who legitimately could play at such a high level from the perimeter, what that does for his teammates just in terms of opening up space, very valuable as well. And so that's where I think that scoring versatility, efficiency, and then the spacing value made him such an elite force in terms of team offense. Like, that scoring value bolstered elite offenses for a long time. He led a dozen straight top 10 offenses. He led 8 top 5 offenses in that 12-year run from 2000 to 2011. He led 4 number 1 offenses, and 3 of those came with Steve Nash. But as much as I love Steve Nash, I do think it's always important to emphasize that when you're talking about the Dallas years, it really was Dirk driving the show. Nash was a really good offensive player, but he was not fully unlocked yet. He was not the player that he would become in Phoenix. And if you look at their offense over those years in Dallas, when Nash and Dirk share the court, they're like a plus 11 relative offense. It's just absolutely GOAT level offense. They literally led the best relative offense in NBA history together in 2002. But when Dirk is on the floor without Nash, they're still better than a plus 6 relative offense. When Nash is on the floor without Dirk, they're just an average offense. And so it was really his scoring that was driving those elite offenses, drove another number 1 offense even after Nash had left. And then I do think, even though Dirk for a time had the reputation of being a playoff dropper, and to some extent rightfully so, when you look at the 2006 finals, when you look at 2007, the first round against the Warriors, obviously that being a massive disappointment. When you look at the 2005 run, he wasn't very good. Like, he did have some issues in terms of playoff performance earlier in his career. Once you get to 2009 to famously, of course, 2011, like, he is one of the greatest playoff scorers in NBA history. And that's when I think he was most equipped to deal with playoff physicality. I think it's when his shot making held up best. And you're talking about a guy who's 50% from mid-range at crazy volume and almost 40% from 3 in the playoffs in that period in time. So just an awesome offensive player and extremely impactful because of that. Like, he's got a career plus 9 on-off swing. To sustain that for that long, it puts him in rare company, where I believe he is only behind in terms of players to play at least 500 games. Jokic, KG, Steph, and LeBron. I think he's just above Chris Paul now. So, like, that's elite company to be in. And over his career, over his good years from 2000 to 2016, the Mavericks won 65% of their games with him and just under 51% of their games without him. So they definitely put solid talent around Dirk for a long time, but he absolutely took them up another level and made them just an absurdly consistent team, especially offensively. So for all those reasons, plus the really strong longevity, I have Dirk here. What I will say is, when I do compare his peak to like a Jokic, there is still a difference there. And when I compare Dirk's peak to really all of the players who I'm going to have up higher than this, I do think he doesn't quite reach the same heights. I think the lack of passing value, even though he was an elite offensive engine in spite of that, it keeps him from being obviously one of these tier 1 offensive engines. And then the very mediocre defense does keep him down in this range for me. Are you meaningfully higher on Dirk? Where do you land on him?
I mean, we're not crazy apart. This does feel low to me for Dirk.
Okay.
For his longevity, though, and what a great offensive engine he was. Like, there's one player that I know that we're going to disagree on who probably beats Dirk in terms of longevity. Debatable if he beats him in terms of peak. I've got Dirk at 15. I mean, I just think that you're getting a guy that is so bankably consistent and so elite, and like, I get that he has the playoff shortcomings early on in his career.
That's not really anything I'm holding against him, to be clear, because I think he totally makes up for it with the later
do too, and that's why
runs.
I have him in that. Like, I just think he's ultimately going to deliver. And like all the things that you said, the ease of the offensive team build around him is such a big selling point for me, where like you go back and watch Dirk, dude, this guy is a walking mismatch. I don't know how anybody dealt with prime Dirk. He is the size combined with the shooting touch, playing at the 4 in this era. Like, you needed to defend Dirk on every part of the court. Like, I thought you did an immaculate job of building out what made him so special, like as a screener, as a ghost screener, just getting him the ball in his spot. It just happened that his spot was everywhere on the floor. You watch Dirk is being defended with these smaller wings. You put a 6'7", 6'8" guy on him, he's just going to shoot over the top of him. And what I love about this polished version of Dirk from like 2006 to 2011 is this combination of fluidity and strength. Like, this is a Dirk that early on in his career, strength was a negative selling point on Dirk, right? He was this skinny, kind of frail guy, and, he could get beat by the athleticism and the strength of these NBA players. That was a part of the big adjustment for Dirk in the NBA. And once he had built out his frame and was strong, there was just nothing you could do with the guy. He was virtually unstoppable. So you combined the height, the shooting touch with the strength and the physicality with this elite craft, the head fakes, the pump fakes, the patience, the post footwork. And then you add in the balance, like the guy could just shoot from any angle, any footwork placement.
Yeah.
And just the consistency. I really want to hammer home the consistency. Before Dirk joined Dallas, this was a team that had been in the playoffs just 6 of 20 seasons prior to Dirk joining this team. After Dirk joined Dallas, they make the playoffs in 15 of 21 seasons, and Dallas wins 50 or more games in 11 straight seasons. Like, to me, you were getting this all-time regular season offensive engine. And then when the playoff scoring translated, it translated in such a big way for 5 to 6 straight seasons where Dallas was, I can't say 5 to 6 straight because that would be disingenuous. They do get bounced by the We Believe Warriors. That's a big time letdown, that individual season. But it did come through and it did deliver in a big way. Like, I just think the longevity and the offensive peak that you're getting with Dirk, I couldn't have him that low to me. Like, to me, Jokic still has some ground to make up in terms of the longevity aspect to me. And it's not crazy. It's like 2 to 4 seasons to me where Jokic still needs to deliver to get where Dirk is, in my opinion. And I just think he is completely immortalized by that 2011 run. The Western Conference Finals versus OKC, he gives you 32 points on over 55% from the field, 50 points in Game 1 versus OKC in that Western Conference Finals. Game 4 erases a 15-point deficit, gives you 40 points, and then he overcomes the big 3 in the NBA Finals with some classic moments. Yeah, we're not super far away from Dirk in terms of where we rank him, but I do feel like this is a little bit low for a guy like Dirk. So I've got him in my 15 spot.
Maybe I view the difference in peak between Jokic and him as being larger than you do. It sounds like that is the case. And I do think there are some limitations with Dirk that we should acknowledge. And the thing that I just kind of mentioned briefly but didn't really get into more is the defense, because honestly, the more I think about it, I think actually Dirk's defense is probably the hardest to work around of any player in my top 20, because where Jokic does bring you some positives with the elite defensive IQ, with the elite defensive rebounding, Dirk really was just a negative defensively, flat out. He was a mediocre defensive rebounder. He was even less of a rim protector than Jokic, but he couldn't play center for you defensively. It was tricky to find a role for him, though, because he was upright, and so he struggled to guard on the perimeter as well. Like, he did not have the instincts. He did not have the awareness defensively. He did not have the hands that Jokic does. Like, just across the board, Dirk was a bad defensive player, especially when we're talking about the context of this range of the all-time greats. And so when you pair that with the lack of creation for others, that's where I just think you need a good bit more around Dirk to build a really dominant team than you do around Jokic. I do think that that is reflected, even though, again, Dirk, massively impactful, but Jokic, to me, on another level when it comes to his ability to absolutely carry teams. And I do think the 2011 run with Dirk is incredible. I also think, though, the supporting cast that he had does always get underrated because of the lack of another star on that team. But the defensive personnel they had with Jason Kidd and Sean Marion and Tyson Chandler and the depth that they had up and down that roster. Like, just a lot of really good two-way players. The shooting that they had, it was an elite three-point shooting team. Jason Kidd, even though his scoring was very limited, could take on that lead playmaking role. And so that was a team that in many ways was really well built around Dirk. Not to say that he wasn't incredible in that run, but like, if I'm picking between who played at a higher level, Dirk in 2011 or Jokic in 2023, I'm taking Jokic. I think Jokic's peak is clearly higher, and I think that's probably the reason that I don't have Dirk higher, is I just like all of the peaks of these guys above him more. I'm interested, though, in who you think we're going to differ on, because I have a feeling it might be one guy who I know you have strong feelings about, and we can circle back to that, but I'm just intrigued. So who do you have at 17, Logan?
Well, we're not going to get to him just yet. I think we're aligned in that, and I have Dirk above him as well. I don't know. It's kind of interesting because I've been the peak guy thus far. I do think we just disagree on a little bit about the peak and longevity with Dirk and Jokic, but that's an interesting debate. Like I said, I think Jokic will eventually, to me, get above Dirk because I agree with you. Like at the peak, it's not a question to me. Like I do think it's Jokic. I just need a few more seasons. I do think
that's fair.
Dirk just did it for so damn long.
I get it. I can totally see either side. Again, I'm just thinking like the championship equity that I am getting in the individual seasons with like 2021 to 25 Jokic, where, you know, he's improving your net rating literally by like 15 points. It's just like some of the most insane impact that we've seen in the history of this game. But I see both sides of this one for sure. Okay, so who is at 17 for you, Logan?
So this is where I have one of the game's early stars. I have Oscar Robertson here in my 17 spot. And
as do I.
Wow. Oscar, to me, is just one of the most complete players of his era. The first really kind of do-it-all big guard. The guy makes 12 straight all-star teams. He makes 9 straight all-NBA teams. And when you're talking about offensive engines, it's the big O, man. Like, It's kind of ridiculous to me looking back at Oscar and just how effective he was. For one, how long he was effective, but two, how immediately effective he was out of the gates. He was an awesome player at Cincinnati. Cincinnati traded in their first-round pick to select him, which you could do back in the territory days. So he plays for the Royals. His first season, the guy is 3rd in points per game and 1st in assists per game. His second season, he averages a triple-double. And some people of his era argue that his assist totals are even sold short because they were just not as generous at handing out assists. So like the inverse of John Stockton and the inverse of some of the Michael Jordan defensive totals. Like maybe the Big O was getting 15 assists a night.
Let's settle down. But they definitely were stingy with assists. They were stingier with assists for sure.
I'm being sarcastic and facetious when I say 15, but who knows? Maybe some of those numbers
Sorry, you're too dang silly for me, Logan. I can't keep up.
Maybe they're even higher. The thing I was saying with Giannis as the lead guy and, you know, holding some of the team builds and stuff around him, even less so with a guy like Big O, that's some of the calculus that I think makes it really difficult to gauge Oscar Robertson, because Oscar does win a championship. He wins a ring. Later, he is a part of a legendary all-time NBA champion with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and the Milwaukee Bucks. Oscar never wins a ring as the lead guy, and a part of the calculus here is that. I don't know how much to hold that against him. I really don't all that much. I think he was just completely carrying subpar rosters and teams around him, and he's consistently running into juggernauts, into buzzsaws. If it's the Celtics, if it's the 76ers, I just don't ever think Cincinnati really had the roster around him to propel and help Oscar to get to that championship. But I mean, he's one of the greatest players of his era. And like I said, when you're talking about skill sets and versatility, I mean, he's just one of the most complete players of his era. I'd say right up there with a guy, maybe not so much defensively as a guy like Jerry West, but in terms of the versatility in other areas, one of the all-time great rebounding guards, one of the all-time great playmakers, and not as great of a scorer as Jerry, but an all-time great scorer of this era too. So, I mean, just a completely versatile and well-rounded skill set, really ahead of his time. So, again, there's a bit of a tier break where, like, I do think there are just guys that were undeniable that at their peaks peaked higher than a guy like Oscar. But he's got pretty good longevity. He has got an insane peak, and I think that warrants him ending up in my number 17 spot.
Yeah, so as I said, I have Oscar here as well. I do think his case is really predicated upon the fact that he is the first really historic offensive engine. He led 5 straight number 1 offenses to start his career, as you're saying, as a rookie, comes in and is already the best offensive player in basketball, an elite scorer, massive volume, elite efficiency, elite playmaker, and takes a team that just flat out sucked before he got there. They were a 19-win team. They were a mediocre offense. Makes them the number 1 offense in basketball. Now, they still had a losing record that season because their defense was that bad. And unfortunately, that's kind of the story of Oscar's years in Cincinnati, that they're the best offense in basketball, but they're so bad defensively that they still aren't a real contender. Even though I think Oscar was just a solid defensive player, not really impactful on that side of the ball, I don't hold that against him, even though it's the Royals' defenses that held their team back, because I really do think that was a failing of the team infrastructure around him. His job was to make them an elite offense, and he did that better than anybody else in this decade. Like, the scoring volume is massive, but it's really the efficiency that I think is so exceptional. And this is true of both him and Jerry West. The fact that you're looking at guards in the 1960s who are posting like plus 8% relative true shooting, it's just insane. But Oscar really was such a unique talent as the big guard who offensively really could do everything. Like you're saying, like, I consider Oscar to be the first great pick and roll player. Obviously didn't utilize it nearly as much as we see in the modern game, but was very effective playing out of pick and roll, was elite in transition, was a big time rim pressurer, right? Really effective getting downhill, got to the free throw line a ton, but was also a really good mid-range shooter as this big guard who could shoot pull-ups over top of you, who could do work with his back to the basket, and because of his size and strength and shot making could beat you with the fadeaways. And then he was also the best player in basketball with a really impressive ability to see a ton of angles at his size, was an elite transition passer especially, and so not like in the tier 1 of all-time passers, but in that tier 2, I would say, while also being a top 3 scorer on the planet. And so just that scoring and playmaking combination from him is very rare, and that's why he was the best offensive player in basketball for as long as he was. When it comes to him not winning a championship as the guy, like you, I don't really care that much because I just think he was clearly good enough to have done it. And like, everything essentially about his offensive game held up in the playoffs. I will say his playmaking value diminished a little bit in the playoffs, but he was still an elite scorer on really good efficiency. He was still the best playmaker in basketball in the playoffs, and he still led to really good offense in the playoffs. And it's even tougher to judge those numbers exactly because so many years he's running into the Boston Celtics, who are the greatest defenses in NBA history. And so you're just not going to post your normal offensive ratings when you're going up against the 60s Celtics. But I do think he was absolutely good enough to be the best player on a championship team. And we did see him with the Bucks, even though he was absolutely past his prime and he's joining a 56-win team with the best player in the world, take that team up another level and make them a historic two-way team. A historic offense was really the role that he played alongside Kareem. So I think Oscar absolutely belongs as a top 20 player, but I also think like he falls very nicely into this range. I think it's hard to argue him much higher or lower. The peak is very high. It doesn't reach the inner circle of the all-time great peaks because his defensive impact wasn't greater. And also, I think the interesting thing to really consider with Oscar, and we talked about this when we did our top 10 offensive peaks episode, and I had him at number 9 in that episode, even though he's unquestionably the greatest player of his era, is just offense wasn't quite as valuable in the 1960s as it is today, as it is in the modern game, simply because the greatest outlier was the Celtics and what they were doing defensively. The single most impactful thing a basketball player could do at that time was be that completely dominant rim protecting defensive anchor. And so we think about, of course, in the context of the modern game, oh, the most valuable thing to be is the great offensive engine. It was still extremely valuable in the 60s. But if you look at the number 1 offenses that he's leading in Cincinnati, again, 5 straight number 1 offenses to start his career. Still, none of those crack the top 60 relative offenses since 1960. So in terms of the separation they were putting between themselves and league average, a number 1 offense then was not equivalent to a number 1 offense now, whereas the Celtics' number 1 defenses were greater than any number 1 defense we've seen since. So that's just a little thing that maybe makes me just a tiny bit lower on Oscar's peak, but I'm still high enough on his peak to have him above Dirk, even though I do think Dirk has the longevity edge. The longevity is good with Oscar. Like you said, he comes into the league. He's one of the very best players on the planet, and he gives you, I would say, 13 years of star level impact. So when you consider that we're talking about the 60s and 70s, that's pretty good longevity. And so this feels like the right spot for him. I mean, we both have him at 17. Guess it just makes sense. I guess Oscar Robertson is the 17th greatest player in NBA history. Starting a business is a big deal, and it can be scary, but Shopify makes it easier and less intimidating. They have all the tools you need to launch, ready to go from day one. That's why Shopify is the place to go to start your business.
That's exactly right, Carson. Shopify has templates and tools to immediately get your site up and running fast without any coding or programming experience needed. And Shopify also optimizes and simplifies the checkout process. With Shopify Checkout, it means more customers actually buy, and returning customers can do it in a single click. If you run into any trouble or questions come up anytime throughout the process, Shopify's built-in AI assistant Sidekick is ready to help you build, troubleshoot, and keep moving. Shopify powers millions of businesses worldwide, and they can power yours too.
All you need is the idea. Shopify handles the rest. So start your free trial at shopify.com/nerdsesh. Start your free trial at shopify.com/nerdsesh. That's shopify.com/nerdsesh. So with that being said, I have Jokic at 16. Who do you have at 16, Logan?
This is where I ultimately ended up with Kevin Durant.
Let's go. I was hoping this was going to be the Kevin that you said. Okay, this is what I had a feeling was coming, and we know how you feel about KD, so let's hear it.
Honestly, the toughest thing to rank was just the longevity with KD, because I think he has incredible longevity. That's what made me debate if he should go above a guy like Dirk. That's one that I was really debating. Like, I think with what KD's done, I think as of right now, I think these guys peaked higher than KD. But as of right now, I would have him above Giannis, above Jokic because of the longevity edge. That's where, when I started debating KD up against a guy like Dirk, and then a guy like Kevin Garnett too. That is where I really started debating the longevity angle with KD. And I think he's an all-time scorer, but when I look at the all-time skill set around him in other areas, and I guess you could kind of make this case for Dirk too, I think it leaves something to be desired. That's ultimately why I went with KG above guys like Dirk and KD as well. I think KG is a fucking freak, man. Like, going back and watching clips of KG from then, I just can't believe that guy existed. He is such a versatile, all-around winning impact player. I don't mean to get my wires crossed here like Ghostbusters to start glazing another Kevin, but
we can get there. We'll get there with KG. He'll have plenty of time.
I just say that to give some context as to why those guys are behind a guy like KG. I just think he has a more versatile, winning, all-around skill set in comparison to them. And so I actually think that KD versus Dirk is an interesting debate in terms of the areas of their game that lack, right? These are two guys that aren't elite playmakers, that aren't elite defenders, that in terms of areas around their offensive and scoring skill set do leave something to be desired. I think KD is probably in a vacuum a little bit better of a scorer than Dirk. I think they both have their trade-offs. To be clear, there are a lot of guys. I would like to go back and redo that scoring episode, not only to the fact that I had Larry Bird in my 10 spot, but I do just think I omitted a lot of important guys: Jerry West, Dirk Nowitzki, Kevin Durant. There's probably some other guys that I could shout out, but I would redo that list. KD, I was trolling that episode. Obviously, KD deserved to be on there.
You were on your hater shit, yeah.
I was on my hater shit that day. I reserve the right to be on my hater shit in the future on any given day as well. But
yeah,
KD versus Dirk is interesting because I think KD takes the edge in terms of an initiating sort of role, right? Where and also KD's an elite spot up off ball guy. It's a ton of the case with KD and his scoring skill set. I think he takes the cake a little bit in terms of that ball handling, initiating from the perimeter, especially at his apex, right? A super fluid, athletic athlete, can get downhill. In the grand scheme of things, the elite initiators and ball handlers, obviously KD leaves a little bit to be desired in that regard. When it comes back to a guy like Dirk, I think Dirk takes the cake in sort of a post-scoring strength, imposition sort of game at their absolute best. So I feel like you can take your pick, but I feel like both of these guys have similar shortcomings, and so it makes it a little bit easier to compare. Ultimately, the reason I went with Dirk over KD is the fact that I think Dirk led out to higher heights of team offense. And as a starting point, I would rather start with a guy like Dirk. And the final component, and maybe this is unfairly holding it against KD.
Vibes.
KD didn't win the title as the guy Dirk did, and I will hold that against him in the grand scheme of legacy. I will hold that against him. This was the toughest dilemma that I had, in my opinion. This range of player, because I was going to have KD, Dirk, KG in any sort of order, but was it going to be Dirk, KG, KD? Was it going to be KD? This was a really hard part for me to order these guys, so I ultimately decided on KD, Dirk, KG in that order. So KD comes in my 16 spot. This is as low as I was willing to go with Kevin Durant. I was willing to go as high as 14 with KD.
Wow. That's the peak of the range you would hear a case for with KD, or just you personally?
I guess, I don't know. That's as high as I would hear a case, I guess, above that. But the height I was willing to go with KD was 14.
Interesting. I feel like I have gotten a little bit lower on KD, and I wind up with him, I think, on the low end of the spectrum as well. I have him at number 15, so we're not far apart on his placement. I do think the Dirk case over him is tough for me, though. I do still think there's a meaningful difference in terms of the peak, and I think you sort of framed it as, oh, well, they have the same great strength and they have some of the same areas where they're not as impactful. I do think it's worth acknowledging, yes, these are two all-time great scorers. I would still take KD as the scorer, but I do think when we say, okay, neither of them are super impactful as playmakers, neither of them are super impactful defensively, like there's still a gap that favors KD in both of those areas. Defensively, we have seen KD consistently be solid throughout his career, and in a specific role, actually be quite a useful defensive player because of the range that he can cover, because of his length, his ability to be a secondary rim protector. As we saw with the Warriors, he can provide like real plus impact on that side of the ball, where again, with Dirk, he was always going to be a negative defensively. And then KD is in a different tier as a passer from Dirk, where Dirk is really limited by the lack of vision and he could really struggle at times with double teams. KD is not a strong passer, but we have seen him grow in that regard. I think when you're talking about like Brooklyn KD 2021, 2022, what he was able to do as the primary ball handler in some lineups as a lead playmaker was impressive. I do think that his lack of high-end passing ultimately keeps him from being a more impactful offensive player, from being more of an elite offensive engine, and it's a reason that I'm not as high on KD as I think a lot of people are. I think it is what you're saying, that I do view him as an all-time great scorer, but a guy whose lack of high-end impact in the other areas of the game keeps him from living up to the top tier of the all-time greats. Like, I'll agree with you on that. I just think we'll disagree on the Dirk of it all, because I do think that KD peaked meaningfully higher. I do think he is a bit more impactful all around, and I do think his longevity is comparable to Dirk's at this point, because I think longevity is like a really strong part of KD's case at this point, and I think we can almost start there with KD. Like, I actually think it's the best aspect of his case, the fact that by 2009, his second year, he's a star level player. By 2010, he's already MVP runner up and clearly a top 5 player on the planet. And then even in 2026, this is a guy who is still making an all NBA team. Like, to have that range, that longevity in terms of elite scoring value, star level value to your team, it's really a rare thing in NBA history. But I do think KD is an interesting case study when it comes to impact and where he can lack a little bit. Now, you mentioned him not being the best player on a championship team. I don't know exactly how to feel about that as a point with KD, because I do think he had 2 elite finals performances. We're talking about a guy who's averaging 35 points per game on mind-boggling efficiency. Like, there's no question he was the best scorer on the planet at that time, and he gave you some of the greatest final scoring, some of the greatest playoff scoring we've ever seen. I mean, when you're talking about overall the Warriors years 2017 to 2019 in the playoffs, he's giving you 30 points per game on plus 9% relative true shooting. Like, that is just absolutely ridiculous. But also, those runs came when he was playing alongside maybe the greatest offensive player ever, depending on who you ask, maybe the greatest enhancer of his teammates' shot quality in NBA history in Steph Curry. And I do think it's clear that Steph is the most valuable player on those championship teams. And I don't just say that because Steph was the best guy on 2 more championship teams and KD never got back to that place. Like, the results are just pretty clear. In the Warriors years, when KD and Steph played together, they had better than a plus 16 net rating, right? We're talking about the greatest team in NBA history. When Steph played without KD, though, they were still posting a plus 12 net rating. That still paints them as this dominant, historic team. When KD played without Steph, they're just posting a plus 4 net rating. And over the years, again, it was consistent where when Steph is on the court without KD, they're winning 80% of their games. And when KD is on the court without Steph, they're still good, but they're just like an above average team. And so I think it's pretty clear that Steph was the engine, that Steph was the driving force of the Warriors being the all-time great team that they were. And if you look at KD's individual numbers too, you see, I mean, just this massive jump in efficiency when he played with Steph compared to without him. His true shooting percentage goes up by 6 percentage points when KD played with Steph. Steph also was more efficient playing with KD. It just makes sense. These elite offensive players amplify each other, but one more so than the other. And when Steph is on the court without KD, he's leading to a plus 7 relative offensive rating. When KD's on the court without Steph, he's only leading to a plus 2.7 relative offensive rating. KD's turnovers also jumped a good bit when he was on the court without Steph to 3.6 turnovers per 75 possessions. So it's interesting to see how much more impacted KD and the Warriors were by Steph's absence than vice versa. But it's really inarguable. I think what's sneaky, though, also is what we saw in the OKC years, where in the regular season, KD could still lead them to be a really strong team without Russell Westbrook. But in the playoffs, OKC was a plus 5 net rating team when KD and Russ played together. But when KD played without Russ, they were posting a minus 3 net rating, which is the same as they were when Russ was playing without KD. So I do think, even though KD is probably the most versatile scorer in NBA history, he did need to play alongside a high-level playmaker when it comes to leading to elite offense in a way that other all-time great scorers didn't. And even though KD was so lean and so efficient with his scoring, right? When you're talking about, I mean, on ball, one of the greatest isolation scores we've ever seen, an elite pick and roll scorer, and just this unbelievable pull-up shooter who could shoot, I mean, in the playoffs in Golden State, like 55% from mid-range and 40% from 3, also getting to the free throw line a lot. And at his athletic peak in OKC, this monster rim pressure who was also so efficient at the basket, and he was also a monstrous scorer off screens and this lethal spot-up player. Like, as a scorer, the guy is just almost flawless. But again, even when I think about him up against like a Kobe Bryant, yes, KD is more efficient, but I think Kobe did more to warp a defense. I think Kobe, his ability to impose himself with even more volume is really valuable. His ability to be a bit better as a turnover suppressor compared to KD, who could struggle with turnovers at times, that's valuable. I think Kobe was just a better passer, point blank, and so he led to better playoff offense as the number 1 guy than KD did. I think it's obvious that you can drop KD onto like any team ever, and he's going to make them better because his scoring value is so supreme and he can fit anywhere because of his scoring skill set. But when it comes to leading as the engine to elite team offense, I just think he leaves something to be desired. And that's not to say that he couldn't lead to really good offense without a lead playmaker alongside him, like we saw it in OKC in the regular season, where he could lead you to a +4, +5 relative offensive rating without Russ, or he could do the same thing in Brooklyn without Harden or Kyrie when he was at his best as a playmaker, but he was just never an elite offensive floor raiser. And I think we see that reflected in the fact that his on-off metrics don't stack up to some of these other great players. His career on-off differential is only +5.3. Now, it's not like that one number is the be-all, end-all, but it is noteworthy when, I mean, there's certainly a strong reflection of impact there, and KD's number is good, but not great. It's not in the same tier with the other best players of his generation of the 21st century. And so I think this is the low end of where you can put KD, just because his longevity is so great, because he's got probably a dozen years as a top 5 player and a peak as a top 3 player and 15 all NBA level seasons. Like, that stuff is just incredible, but I don't think he ever made a good case for being the best player in the world. I don't think he was ever the best player on those Warriors teams. And so, as good as the longevity is, I don't think the peak is strong enough with KD. I have gotten a little lower on his peak. I think about him versus a Kevin Garnett, and I'm like, it's just hard for me to think of situations where I actually think that like Kevin Durant makes the basketball team better, where he adds more of an overall boost in value to his team than KG would. Are there certain situations where you want KD more? Of course, because KD is one of the greatest scorers, one of the greatest playoff scorers we've seen in the history of this game, but he didn't really carry teams like the guys above him did, and that's why I land with him in the 15 spot. And I know you love it.
Well, that was awesome. I was just glad to be a part of this experience. I think you said it really well. I mean, it's a nuanced discussion with KD, and I think the biggest selling point about Kevin Durant in these all-time contexts, is his malleability. Like the fact that, I can drop KD in anywhere, but as the lead guy, there are other guys that I would prefer. And so, I mean, I think you said it really well. Those numbers are kind of staggering, though. The Westbrook one kind of shocks me, because I feel like when people, at least me, I can't speak for people, when I think back to those teams, I think back, good compliment, not a perfect fit. That's a really interesting kind of on-off differential with him and KD. With Curry, it makes more sense, right? With Russ, that kind of reframe some things. But I think you did a good job of hammering home his strengths, but not disparaging him in totality, but just highlighting his shortcomings and why he isn't higher, because I'm sure there are people that would have KD in like the top 10 or something like that.
Yeah, because of the scoring, because of the longevity, I can see the angle, but I'm not there with KD. And I do come back to one more number when it comes to just who was driving the Warriors' success. 27-4 when Steph played without KD over those regular seasons. 23-17 when KD played without Steph. Like, it's just a different level of impact on the basketball game. It's a different level of how transformative a guy like Steph is offensively. And then KD, I mean, he's not impactful enough defensively, consistently enough to meaningfully move him higher on this list. I do think he falls into the mold of, I mean, such a great scorer, but just not that impactful in any other aspect of the game. And like, we're into the freak range here now, man. We're into the all-time greats. And I don't think his impact quite stacks up. That being said, I mean, he has made like every team that he's ever played for better. So I will run through, just because we've seen him in so many different stops. OKC won 58% of their games with him, just 49% without. The Warriors are the only team where it's the same win percentage, 74 with him, 74 without him. The Nets won 66% of their games with him, 49% without. The Suns won 59% of their games with him, 33% without. The Rockets we only have this year, they actually went 4-0 without him. They were 48-30 with him. But like, I do think maybe the Nets and Sun years with KD can actually get a little bit underrated because he was still so damn good. And those teams both failed him in their own ways. I mean, with the Nets, it was really just the injury luck and how screwed they got on that front. And then the Suns, as a team, they just weren't close. But the Suns did suck without KD when he was there. And they were actually good when he played. And so I do think he's a very impactful player, but as impactful as the 14 names I have above him, I couldn't quite get there. I think there's an argument for him to be higher for sure because of the longevity, but I do think if we're talking about KG, I think KG peaked higher. And the Kobe one is interesting to me because I think there are a lot of similarities between him and Kobe just in terms of being those all-time scoring wings who you think of as just decent playmakers, solid defenders. They don't have the best on-off metrics. They've got great longevity, but again, Kobe led to better playoff offense as the engine. And I also think the other thing that's worth noting is, I don't want to talk about Kobe yet, but his playoff efficiency is actually comparable to KD's because Kobe's efficiency at his peak stayed the same in the playoffs and even got a little bit better compared to the regular season. KD does take a bit of a dip. Now, again, the KD who we're criticizing here still in the playoffs is giving you 29, 8, and 4 on plus 4% relative to shooting. He's a scoring monster, but didn't lead to elite playoff offense as the guy, did have some of the turnover issues, did have some of the playmaking limitations. If you look at the OKC years, 2010 to 2016 in the playoffs, he's giving you just under 27 points per 75 possessions. Kobe from 2006 to 2012, looking at the years when he was in the playoffs without Shaq, is giving you 2 more points per 75. Kobe's giving you 1.5 more assists. KD is just down at 3.5. Turnovers are essentially identical. Kobe's leading to a slightly better relative offensive rating when he's on the court, but the swing is bigger. Kobe's improving his team offense by 10 points in terms of offensive rating. KD's only improving his by 6. So I just think that's an interesting conversation because I think people think, in today's NBA, we're so focused on efficiency, but it's not as though your offensive impact as a great scorer comes down to your true shooting percentage. There's so much more that goes into the way that you can leverage your scoring threat, and volume does matter, and turnover suppression matters, and all these different things. And ultimately, I think Kobe was a more impactful offensive player than KD. I think I've come around to that position. So we're actually pretty similar on KD. And now we move in to the 14 spot, Logan. Who do you have here?
This is an all-time audible. I've realized that I am now moving forward going to have to start pushing agendas and really rigid based on this list.
Okay.
This is another audible I have called from the last time we did this list. This is an audible even from our scorers episode where I just think every time we talk about this guy, I get a little bit lower and lower on him historically. I think this is going to sound crazy, but I have Wilt Chamberlain here in my 14 spot. Is that wild?
Whoa. I think it's wild. I have Wilt as low as I think he can really be argued, and that's number 11. 14 is really, really low, but go ahead and make the case.
I just, every time we bring up Wilt, I just kind of think less and less of Wilt, and I don't know if it's logical or rational to have him this low. This is just kind of how I feel. This is a guy who and I'm going to frame this negatively. I think there's a lot of positives with Wilt, but I just want to emphasize where I'm working from and where I'm coming from. When I used to think of Wilt, it was these gaudy scoring numbers where he is clearly the most unstoppable player of his generation. And that's a lot of regular season numbers where he is putting up these gaudy numbers, but they don't really mean a whole lot. And what I mean by that is it didn't lead to elite team offense in the way that an Oscar Robertson's complete game did lead to, where in the playoffs, routinely Wilt performed below his regular season standard and proved that his skill set wasn't the most valuable in the sport, where Bill Russell's clearly was of that era. That's why the Celtics won more and more than any other team. And Wilt still may have gotten his numbers in volume, but his efficiency took a tick, and it didn't lead out to great team offensive results. And more so than anything else, Carson, the struggle that I had with ranking Wilt is the fact that with these other guys, even with Dirk, right? Dirk figured it out. started leading out to these great team offenses, and it translated to the playoffs. And he had a 5 or 6 year run where you can go, man, Dirk he had it all, right? Kevin Garnett, maybe not had the team success, but like he had a stretch where like he had figured everything out and like had a complete impact. Wilt has a 1 to 3 year run where he had really figured it out. And that's one of the biggest holdups to me, where like Wilt only put it together at his absolute apex for like 2 to 3 seasons, where I don't know, man, like he is a two-way demon, but what all did it really mean? What all did it really, and I don't mean it he didn't win a championship. I literally mean it in the team results that he put forth, where he's a limited playmaker and passer to the detriment of his teams, where, he's a great scorer and a great defender, but again, what all did it mean in the grand scheme of things? I just continue to think less and less of Wilt because it took him so long to figure it out, because when he did figure it out, his peak was so brief, where it's with these other guys, I can at least get 6 or 7 years of a real peak from you. Or, I don't know, man, every time we come back to Wilt and I look at his resume, I come away a little bit underwhelmed, where the volume numbers are gaudy, but it didn't lead to elite team results. And so, I don't know, man. I think back to a guy like KG. I would rather have Kevin Garnett. I think the career and totality of what KG provides me, because he's got one of the most versatile, all-around, well-rounded skill sets ever that just translates. Where, again, Wilt only put it together for a few seasons. I look at a Kobe. Kobe I have my issues with, but Kobe figured out how to do it as the number 2, and then later in his career with great teams, Grant figured out how to do it as the number 1. I don't know, man. I'm really underwhelmed by Wilt, and I do feel confident that this is the range for him. I'd just rather have everybody else above him on my team for their career.
I just don't really understand why you keep on like hitting on this guy figured it out, that guy figured it out, when it's like Wilt figured it out as much as any player ever, and like his peak when you're talking about 1966 to 1968 is
short.
A top 5 peak in NBA history.
It's so short.
But you can't just write off the fact that, yeah, I would agree, he wasn't maxing out what his impact could have been with the Warriors from 1960
Doesn't that matter that he was a detriment in the playoffs to like his team's ultimate success? That is and I agree, like KG couldn't have done it because he didn't have the team around him. And I think that is a part of the calculus with KG that makes it so difficult to rank him as an individual player and all these different factors. But it's like, I almost look at Wilt as he reaches these incredible regular season peaks in scoring numbers, but it's like it didn't translate in the way it needed to win, to ultimately do the damn thing, to finish the job.
What I'm saying is, this is a guy who at his best peaked, in a different stratosphere from a Dirk Nowitzki, peaked substantially higher than a Kobe Bryant, than a Kevin Garnett, right? Like, that's how ridiculous
you think
Wilt
he peaked
Chamberlain
that much
was.
higher than Kobe?
From 66 to 68, dude, he was the only player to anchor a defense better than Russell's Celtics in Russell's entire career, while he also led to by far the best offense of the 1960s. Like, 1967 Wilt Chamberlain is just a completely dominant basketball player, 24, 24, and 8 on plus 14% relative true shooting, while also being the second best defender in the NBA, arguably. Like, he did that, man. That's real. He's probably, or at least possibly, the most talented player in NBA history relative to era, and he could dominate in so many different ways. It's kind of absurd, and this is funny because I was coming in here preparing to make a more negative Wilt take because I have him at number 11, which I think is very low for Wilt Chamberlain because of the monstrous talent that he was and because of the legend and the numbers and all of that. But even though I would agree that he didn't put it all together for very long, right? Like 1966 to 1968 Wilt is a different player than the rest. You seem to just be devaluing the fact that he did also have one of the highest scoring peaks ever.
Yes,
that he did have a run with the Lakers in which he was one of the greatest defensive players that we've ever seen. That he was clearly the best player in the world and the best player on one of the most dominant champions we've ever seen, and was arguably still the best player on another championship team. Like, when you put all of that together, to have him down at 14, I just think you're being overly critical of the stuff outside of his absolute peak, and I don't think you're appreciating his absolute peak enough if you're questioning, like, is it that much higher than Kobe? Because yes, man, like, you can say, oh, it's a distinct peak, it's a brief peak, I would hear that, but like, maybe the most gifted basketball player ever literally maxed it all out. He became the most efficient player in basketball. He was this elite playmaking hub. He's leading the NBA in assists. He's anchoring elite defense. Like, he's doing it all.
I mean, I realize all that. What I'm struggling to do with all this is the fact that until 1967, right, there's 9 teams in the NBA. The first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 seasons of Wilt's career, they are a below league average offense. They're below.
That's not true. They're above league average in 1962, just barely.
I don't mean by rating. I mean by their literal rank in the league. I think one season they ranked above 5th out of 9 teams in the grand scheme of offenses. So it's like, he was clearly worse in the playoffs, not by that much. He was worse in the playoffs over that stretch. His regular season offensive results didn't lead them to being ranked in the top half of offenses in a field of 9 teams. I'm just saying, like, when it comes to winning is the goal in that era. I just think when we're talking about leaving something to be desired, Wilt is doing that for the first 7 seasons, and I get he puts it together, and I want to, if we were ranking peak, I've ranked Wilt's peak, I think, top 5 of all time. It is undoubtedly the peak. I'm just saying, when you have 7 seasons of...
You got to stop including 1966 in there. 1966, Wilt, I mean, he got even better in 67, but that's already one of the highest peaks in NBA history.
Fine, the first 6 seasons. Then let's just do that. Like, what do you do with those years when he is clearly, like, he's very talented, he's one of the league's best players? What do you do with the fact that he was such a limited playmaker and it didn't lead to these team results? I thought that was the goal, you know?
That's why I'm as low on Wilt as I am, because I'm really not that high on the Warriors years, even though that's when he's putting up the most monstrous scoring seasons in terms of raw volume in NBA history.
Wouldn't that make Wilt a kind of losing player?
Dude, I have Wilt at number 11. Like, I'm low on Wilt. You're just pushing it too far.
I'm just saying that,
I don't think he maxed out his impact. But if you're going to say losing player, then no, I can't get there. I don't think he was as impactful in those early years as the raw scoring volume would indicate. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. But also, like, what you seem to be overlooking is even before he became the best version of himself defensively, he's still one of the great defensive players that we've seen, because he was the biggest physical athletic freak in the NBA. And every one of these years, right, even though he's not leading to very good offenses, he's still consistently leading to very good defenses. So you're talking about a very good defensive anchor who is also scoring with massive volume at good efficiency, not a very good offensive engine yet. I agree with that, because he had the single biggest imbalance between scoring and passing in NBA history. For the first few years of Wilt's career, he would not get his teammates involved. It was egregious, and that's why, again, I don't care nearly as much as everybody else that he averaged 50 points per game in a season, because it didn't lead to good team offense. And also, the context that's needed there is the pace of play was just so fast that, like, the raw number is a little bit inflated there as well. Like, I'm with you on that. But I think you're pushing it too far if you're saying, oh, Wilt was a loser. He hadn't figured it all out. He wasn't as impactful as he would become. He's still making his team substantially better, though.
Maybe I'm getting hyperbolic with that. All I'm saying is that with other players, they're giving me more complete value in totality of their career than Wilt is, where he is flawed for the first 6 seasons. Whereas I'm getting, again, more holistic value from just other players that don't have significant flaws like that.
But flawed still means second best player in the NBA for his first 6 seasons. Like, if that's flawed, shit, I'll take flawed, man. Like, Wilt was just that great. He was just that talented that even though, yes, there were tweaks that needed to be made for sure, like, still, he is so damn good. Now, I will say, like, I agree with you on a lot of this stuff. I think we just disagree in terms of the degrees. I think you're taking it too far, but the Warriors weren't that great with Wilt. They won 54% of their games overall in his tenure. And like you said, they mostly were below average offenses. And then before he got traded in 1965, they were just 10-28 when he played. Like, they sucked. And then they did a little retool. A couple years later, they're back in the finals with Rick Barry. So I agree that the impact is not what it could have been with Wilt at that point. And then he goes to a Sixers team that was in a solid place. They were like a 500 team before he got there, and he takes them to a championship in 1967, and he leads one of the greatest teams ever with one of the greatest individual seasons ever, and they're just a historically dominant two-way team. Now, after he leaves, again, Sixers were still good. The year after he left, they won 55 games, and their offensive rating remained the same. Like, those were talented basketball teams. It was not purely about Wilt Chamberlain. And then he goes to a Lakers team that was coming off of a 52-win season, and they had just lost in Game 6 of the finals. Obviously, the Lakers had plenty of success before Wilt got there, but they could never get over the hump. They had never put together a truly great team. And then, of course, they do have another one of the all-time great teams in 1972 when they win 69 games in the title, the all-time win streak record, 33 straight. And even though I would argue that overall, in their tenure together, Jerry West was the best player on the Lakers over Wilt, in that playoff run, Jerry West really struggled offensively, and I do think that Wilt was probably the best player in that postseason, even though he was in a much reduced offensive role. In his years with the Lakers, though, they were still good with him off the court. They won 56% of their games without him, but they won over 70% of their games with him. And so even though, I mean, I agree that like Wilt had more help than he gets credit for, and his absolute peak wasn't that long. And on either side of it, there are things where I'm like, yeah, in the early years, I mean, the refusal to pass the ball is a problem. And in the later years, like the fact that he just wasn't nearly the same offensive threat, okay, that matters. But the totality of it is still 13 years of elite impact with one of the very highest peaks we've ever seen, with a guy who probably was the best player on two championship teams. And all of that, to me, it's just too much to have him all the way down at 14. Like, again, I think I'm low on Wilt. This felt like the absolute low end that I could put him at. And I do feel like you're being overly critical of him because you see the talent and you see what he could have been. And for his entire career, he did not live up to what he could have been. But this was a guy who had the ability to be the best on the planet at so many different things. And it's just like such a rare level of ability.
Yeah, I agree. I'm just working from a place of I'm going to have to eat like I'm getting a player that is too flawed to win a championship his first 5 or 6 seasons. I don't want to take anything away from.
But I don't know if that's true. I just think you keep underrating the defense with him.
I'm just saying that, like, if he kept in this era, like he was this limited of a playmaker, which the numbers back up. Like, I understand that he's an all-time defender, like, of course, of this era. But I'm saying, like, if this was this glaring of a problem and it was the thing that killed his teams every year in the playoffs, like.
But you're saying killed his teams like it's Wilt holding them back, which in a way it is, but it's also Wilt propelling them forward because he's Wilt Chamberlain. Like, again, I just keep looking at didn't play up to his potential as wasn't that good. And those are two very different things.
Winning impact is what I'm going with. Winning, I just don't think his impact is that of what the numbers would indicate that they are.
I would agree with that. You're just taking it too far. Like, okay, he didn't lead to very good offenses in his time with the Warriors, right? Like, as a rookie, okay, he comes in, he's scoring 37 a game, whatever, but there's still a bad offense that year, but he improves their defense. He improves their offense, and so they go from a 32-win team to a 49-win team, and it's like, yes, he was a playoff dropper at this point in his career, right? And he wasn't as impactful as he could have been. He still leads them to the NBA Finals in 1964. Like, I just think it's more nuanced than you're making it out to be. I think you are a Wilt extremist. And I kind of thought I was going to be a Wilt extremist, but I should never underestimate, Logan, your ability to push things even further. I don't know, man. I just think you're selling him short. I have my issues with Wilt for sure, and it's everything you laid out. I also think there is just so much ability with him and so much impact at his peak. And even if the impact did not always match the ability, and that's why I have him down at 11, I would be closer to having him up at like 8 than I would down at 14. I just think there's a level of talent with Wilt that I have to have him a little higher than you do, at least.
I mean, I guess we're just going to have to agree to disagree.
All right. I mean, I think in the scheme of things, we're in the same quartile on Wilt Chamberlain. You're just in the 99.9th percentile of Wilt hating. And I don't know, I'm somewhere in like the 80th percentile.
This is just where I've moved to.
Okay. All right. Very interesting, Logan. So in my 14 spot, I have a contemporary of Wilt Chamberlain's who I love very much, but who I couldn't get higher than this. I think this is the right spot for him. I have Jerry West at 14. One of the absolute greatest scorers in NBA history, one of the most complete guards in NBA history. Like, Jerry West was just so damn good, and he really never gets enough credit. The scoring numbers are absolutely preposterous, and he was, like Oscar, a big guard who was extremely effective getting all the way downhill, who was a massive free throw generator, but who also was a really high-level jump shooter, like absolutely the best jump shooter of this period of time in the NBA, and wasn't quite as big and strong as Oscar, but was still, again, a big guard who also was so skilled. I mean, the ball handling is just so outstanding for this time. The efficiency and the intentionality of every movement, the change in direction, the deceptiveness that he had as a mover, like just so hard to contain with the ball in his hands. And then he had the elite mid-range shooting and the turnarounds in the pull-up game. Like, as a scorer, what Jerry West did is some of the greatest work that we've ever seen, especially in the playoffs, where he gives you, in his career, 29.1 points per game on plus 5.5% relative to shooting. Again, with both him and Oscar. I mean, the efficiency on top of the volume is just so damn impressive, but also he was a strong playmaker, not at the start of his career, but he grew into that. And also one of the best defensive guards that we've seen. And I always feel like this is the reason that I put him above Oscar. It's, I mean, just how outstanding West's playoff resume is. And then the fact that although Oscar is the slightly better offensive player, West was such an impact defender. He had crazy length for a point guard at this time. I mean, a 6'9" wingspan. He was a good vertical athlete, so like a rare guard who actually could offer you some secondary rim protection. Also, like just a monster when it comes to forcing steals, great anticipation, super disruptive in passing lanes, and again, had that insane length. So when it comes to just being an all-time great scorer, a strong playmaker, a really strong defender, a good rebounder for his position, Jerry West checks all these boxes. And so I would consider him higher. I think like we're in a range where, honestly, KD, I think you could make a top 10 argument. I wouldn't like it, but West, you could make a top 10 argument that I would definitely hear. And I think that applies to all of the guys from 11 to 14 for me. He was a really strong offensive engine. He led 3 number 1 offenses. And again, especially once he grew to be that high-level playmaker in the mid to late 60s, that's when he peaked as an offensive engine, and just super impactful throughout his career. Like, when he played, the Lakers won 64% of their games in his career. When he didn't play, they won just 48%. So you put together this peak that is high, not the highest, but a high peak, pretty solid longevity, like only 932 career games, but 13 years of star level impact in the 60s and 70s when it was tougher to play a super long time. I do think that that's pretty solid. I just think Jerry is held back by the fact that he didn't have one of the absurd peaks of the guys above him, or that he didn't have that sort of absurd longevity where you are talking about guys who are giving you 16 or 17 seasons of star impact, or you're talking about guys with top 10 peaks of all time who were like tier 1 two-way giants or tier 1 offensive engines. Like, that's the only reason that I don't have Jerry higher. I truly don't really have like any knocks on him. I think he was so damn good, but again, we're really talking about walking among giants at this point, and I just think there are dudes who either peaked higher or had meaningfully better longevity than Jerry West, but I would still take him above Kevin Durant. That one's really close, but I think, again, I mean, both guys are all-time scorers. I think West gives me more all-around impact.
Yeah, I agree. I have West in my 12 spot. He should have been a lock in my top 10 scorers episode. That's another pivot I would have made. He's such a versatile, complete player. I mean, I really think you said it. The scoring, he scored over 30 points per game 4 times. In his playoff career, the guy has 29 points per game on 47% from the field with 10 free throw attempts a night. You're talking about one of the elite playmakers of his era, an elite defender of his era, and a great rebounder for a guard. As a rookie, he improves the Lakers by 11 games in terms of winning. They went to the Western Conference Finals with him as a rookie. Over his final 13 career seasons, they only missed the finals 4 times. Yeah. Unfortunately for him, they lose in 8 of those 9 finals, and they lose to Boston in 6 of the 8.
And the West was just a lot weaker than the East. Like, they got to the finals a lot, but again, they didn't have a great team until Wilt got there. A lot of times it's like, oh, we won 46 games, we won 48 games, and we made the finals because nobody else is coming out of the West. Not to devalue that, but just to say it's not like every time the West led a team to the finals, they were an elite team. I think that context is important.
I also think the other context that's important is just how damn close Jerry West was so many of these different times. Yeah. Like Frank Selvey clanging the game winner in Game 7 of the 62 finals.
Nice shot,
the
Frank.
69 finals where Jerry West wins finals MVP as a loser, tying Game 3 of the 70 NBA finals with a 60-foot heave against the Knicks. Mm-hmm. Like, the guy was just on the doorstep so many times, and still, even at the end, was providing value. The 72 season, that is an all-time NBA champion, like you mentioned. They're 39-3 at midseason. They're 69-13 at the end of the season. That record stood until the 96 Bulls broke it. They finished that year 81-16 as a dominant champ. Granted, like you mentioned, that's with Gail Goodrich, Jim McMillan, Wilt Chamberlain, Happy Harrison. That is a really good team. But Jerry's still giving you a ton of value, 26 points per game and 10 assists per game in that season. And the guy's just a tough son of a bitch. One of the craziest stories about Jerry. Apparently broke his nose 9+ times during his playing career and was still always available. Yeah, I think Jerry's just underrated. So I've got him at my number 12 spot. I do agree with you. I think when we're getting up into this level of greatness, it's kind of what order do you have these guys in? So, yeah, I've got Jerry in my number 12 spot.
I do think he is a very interesting example of how weird ring culture can be, because when he finally gets his ring in 1972, it's literally the worst playoff run of his career. You know, it's like that's just when they had the team. There were so many times where he was unbelievable individually, and they didn't win it all. I mean, like his finals numbers before 1972, he was averaging 33 points per game on like plus 6% relative true shooting. And then in the 1972 finals, like he kind of sucks. He scores under 20 points per game. He shoots 32% from the field. He struggled the series before that offensively too when they beat a really great Bucks team. And yet there's so many absolutely ridiculous performances from him in the playoffs, in the finals. But, I mean, you mentioned 1969 is up there for the greatest finals performance in a loss ever. It's just interesting to me how Jerry West might be viewed differently, unfairly, if he hadn't won a ring when he actually played so much better so many times before than in the run in which he actually won the ring. But overall, one of those guys who just, no question, good enough to be the best player on a championship team, gave his team a lot of quality bites at the apple, made them better on both sides of the ball. And yeah, I mean, I had him as a top 5 scoring peak in NBA history. I think he was an absolutely absurd scorer. And I really do value that playoff scoring so much, especially because to be able to, again, increase volume and even increase or maintain efficiency at that sort of volume is just such a rare ability in NBA history. So I think 12 is a good spot to have him. I do think, though, when it comes to my criteria and the overall impact over a career and the player who gives me the best chance to win the most championships just by having them on my team, I do slightly prefer Kevin Garnett. I have him at number 13. And again, when I think about this criteria, I think there's an argument for him in the top 10, because I don't think it's even an argument that when you just talk about like the failure of an organization around a player, Kevin Garnett was more screwed than any other player in NBA history. And if you simulate his career 100 times, in terms of team success, like this reality is in the first percentile. KG did everything that he could have, but he was just dealing with such disastrous surroundings for so long that no, he didn't win a title in Minnesota. He only got his team to the conference finals once, but the impact was just so clearly among the greatest players that we've ever seen. We're talking about a top 5 defender in NBA history here, arguably the most versatile defensive player ever, arguably the smartest defensive player ever, who also took on a massive offensive load and did some of the most underrated offensive floor raising in NBA history. What KG did in Minnesota is unequivocally one of the greatest two-way carry jobs we've ever seen, and he did it over and over and over again. If you just look at the results from 2001 to 2007 in Minnesota, KG improved their offensive rating by 9.3 points. He improved their defensive rating by 3.9 points. So that is a 13.2 point on-off swing sustained over 7 years in the regular season. And in the playoffs, he has a 17 point on-off swing. So again, he is making his team statistically better by as big a margin as we've ever seen. From 2002 to 2004, the Wolves posted a +7 net rating with him on the court and a -11 net rating with him off the court. Like, this is stuff that we've only ever seen from Jokic in recent years, from LeBron James at his absolute peak. Like, it is absurd the level of impact that KG had and the shit that he was being asked to drag to success, and he was actually doing it. David Robinson might also be in that club in terms of on-off stuff in the early 90s if we had the data, but we don't. From 2002 to 2004 in the playoffs, the Wolves were even in KG's minutes. Logan, they were a -25 net team without him. That's not even a fucking NBA team. I don't even know how it's possible to be losing the minutes that badly, but that's the sort of shit that the Wolves were up to when KG was off the floor and he was doing everything in his power to keep them afloat against these Titans of the West.
Is that a number worse than, like, Jokic at his prime?
Bro, it's like way worse than any number I've ever seen before.
I mean, like, I just know that, like,
-25 net without him in the playoffs.
Jokic was like the gaudiest of that stat, but that's the worst I've ever heard.
Yeah, in the regular season, again, Jokic has the biggest on-off differential, but in terms of a playoff multi-year run, nothing is going to compare to what KG was going through at that time. It's not that huge, but, I mean, they made the conference finals in 2004. I think it's only a few hundred minutes with him off. But still, disgusting that I had to share
what
it.
seasons? What
2002
years?
to 2004.
Bruh.
Yeah, which is when KG was at his best. Overall, from 1997 to 2007, the years that KG was a star in Minnesota, they won 56% of their games with him, which is not an elite number, but they went 4-19 without him. KG barely missed time. It's actually a strength in his resume that he was so available, but whenever he was off the court, they were a fucking disaster, more so than any other superstars teams in NBA history, and somehow he is still getting them to be a legitimately good two-way basketball team because he is this one-of-a-kind defensive player who, even though because he wasn't a dominant rim protector, he wasn't single-handedly propelling them to be like dominant defenses in Minnesota. He also had a crazy offensive load, which factors into it. He's still making them way better defensively because he's so long. He's got such great hands. He's so fluid. He's got a 7'5" wingspan. Like, his ability to guard the perimeter, to switch, to change direction, just absolutely ridiculous. He was a great big when it comes to generating steals. He could really guard the post at a high level and was just such a pest there and so good in terms of his understanding of leverage, his physicality, his length, extremely valuable. He was still a really good rim protector, and for being a non-center, for somebody who mostly played power forward, like one of the most monstrous defensive rebounders we've ever seen. And on top of the fact that he's like this absolute athletic, physical alien, he's also a genius. Right? Just insane anticipation defensively, insane awareness and understanding of what the opponents were trying to get to on every possession. And he also played maybe harder than any other player ever, especially considering the load that he had on both sides of the ball. So that's why defensively, KG is a guy who just makes any defense so much better, can play any coverage, can take on so many matchups, can make a positive defensive impact in so many different ways, all the while offensively, he's just so underrated because he was asked to be the primary creator, the primary playmaker for those offenses with so little help around them. And he made them really good offenses in Minnesota, like consistently top 10 sort of offenses. He was so uniquely skilled. Again, just like freakishly agile for being his size, but the handle was insane. The shot making, I mean, consistently is like 45% for mid-range. So he was an elite face-up scorer, isolation, post-up, one of the best in the NBA. Really good in transition. And then he's just one of the best passing bigs that we've ever seen. And so he was a legitimate offensive engine, again, for these teams that were so badly lacking in offensive talent. Like, there really is no comparison in terms of the lack of talent around him. I talked a lot about David Robinson and how he was getting screwed last episode. What KG went through is even different. And a big part of this is just the Timberwolves being incompetent. A big part of this is them getting stripped of so many picks because they had to fucking tamper with Joe Smith of all people. They had to circumvent the cap for Joe Smith, who sucks. Like, it was effectively impossible for them to build a championship level team around Kevin Garnett because of just the complete lack of assets that they had. So he is the unluckiest player ever in terms of the surrounding talent he had in his prime years. His best teammate of the first 12 years of his career was a 34-year-old Sam Cassell, who joins the team in 2004, and they immediately win 58 games and lose in Game 6 of the Western Conference Finals against the fucking Kobe Shaq Lakers. Like, that's what happened when you put a good offensive point guard alongside Kevin Garnett. And also they bring in Latrell Sprewell that season. And it's just like, all right, now we're a contender just like that. But his ability to, in spite of all of the garbage teams he was asked to carry, consistently get them to the playoffs year in, year out, in the toughest conference ever, when they're losing the minutes without him at this unparalleled rate, like, it's just absolutely remarkable. That's what he did in Minnesota. I think I said this about Jokic, but even more so for KG. It's hard to argue against him having a top 10 regular season peak of all time. Like, it is just insane how much he carried those teams on both sides of the ball. And then he goes to Boston, and he's not at his peak anymore, but with actual talent around him in a smaller offensive role, he is still the most impactful, best player on those teams. He anchors some of the greatest defenses in NBA history, especially the '08 Celtics, one of the very best defenses of this century, because of his versatility, his athleticism, his mind, everything that we talked about. And so over those years in Boston, 2008 to 2013, he improves their offensive rating by 4.9 points. He improves their defensive rating by 5.8 points in the regular season. So a plus 10.7 regular season on off and a plus 12.8 playoff on off in Boston. And again, this is KG not at his best. So he's just such an insanely versatile player, such a portable skill set, and it made him so absurdly impactful in two dramatically different situations. One where he is asked to be this floor raiser and he does it at an unbelievable all-time level. Another where he's asked to be this all-time defensive anchor and supporting offensive player, and he does that at an incredible level, even though he's not at his best anymore. And so when we come back to the total impact and the value added, I mean, over his career, a plus 11.3 on-off swing. That is second only to Jokic. That's what he did in the regular season. In the playoffs, though, and keep in mind, I mean, the knock on KG is that he's a playoff dropper, and I think that is the correct knock, and we can talk about that. He is still improving his team's net rating by 14.5 points, and he is doing that over this insanely long career. Like, think about all the years that I covered. In 1997, he's a star with the Timberwolves. In 2013, he's still bringing star impact with the Celtics. Like, 17 years of strong impact with a strong MVP peak. I know what the knock is on KG, and I imagine that you're going to discuss it, and we can have that conversation. But even the flaws that he had as a playoff offensive number one, which are real, are probably overstated. I just think you have to be high on KG. The more you watch, the more you dig in. He was such an absolute freak. And like I said, I think there's an argument for him to be in the top 10. When you just think about starting from scratch, give me this guy for their career, KG really might be there because the peak is that high and the longevity is that great.
I mean, I have KG in the exact same spot, too. If I was building an NBA dream team from scratch, Kevin Garnett would 100% be on it. I've
Yeah.
said this earlier, but I mean, Prime KG is just so incredible to go back and watch. Like, so long, athletic and fluid, so incredibly versatile, a monster in transition, and really, really great jump shooter, too. I mean, just the mid-range work, watching him work off-ball as a post-scoring hub, too. Like, the guy's a borderline pretty elite mid-range scorer of the time. And, like, I think the knock on him, like you mentioned, is the playoff scoring and the fact that he couldn't get super easy, highly efficient, offense. But again, as you mentioned, how much of this can you really hold against Kevin Garnett when it's like he didn't have a guy that could set him up? I do love the fact that so much of his offense came within the flow. Like, this wasn't a guy who was exceptionally ball dominant. Like, they ran the offense through him because they needed him to, because they were so strapped for talent. But it wasn't a guy that was going to, dominate touches and, dribble the air out of the ball. Like, he could, it could come within the flow of the offense. And then he is a transcendent sort of defensive player where he was an elite rim protector and defensive playmaker, could switch out onto the perimeter and check, all kinds of archetypes defensively. Really good rebounder, underrated playmaker. And as we're going to continue talking about, I mean, it's hard to hold the lack of team success against Kevin Garnett. I'm not going to slander Joe Smith. He's a friend of the show. I know him personally. We're best buds.
True. I forgot about that.
Great basketball player, Joe Smith, Hall of Famer, obviously. They do get stripped of 5 first-round picks in that stretch. 01 to 05. 03 and 05 are returned. Thanks, David Stern. They get Indubi Ebi and Rashad McCants. Oh, yeah, the Timberwolves are going to go win a chip with those guys.
Let's fucking go.
Very high peak, underrated longevity, as you mentioned, was bringing you value on championship teams in Boston later on in the career, helping anchor a really all-time elite defense. I couldn't have KG any lower than 13. This feels right.
How high could you have him?
11. I think it's hard for me to make a case for KG in the top 10 with the names that I have there. So 13 to 11. I ultimately end up with KG at 13.
The reason I think I could put him in the top 10 is because of the longevity. It's because, I mean, he is giving you a handful more really good seasons than a couple of other guys. But I do think, I mean, as much as we love KG here, and I think kind of all of the nerds love KG because his impact is just so ridiculous and wasn't always sexy, right? Again, I mean, he's not one of the greatest offensive players ever, but underrated offensively, put in extremely difficult circumstances and so impactful overall on both sides of the ball. In terms of the playoff offense, though, I do think like that's why I don't have him higher. And again, this is like where I wish we could do another simulation of KG's career and see what happened if you just put him with really good offensive supporting cast where he did have somebody else who could take on more of a playmaking load, somebody who could create for him, tap into him more as a play finisher, where he wasn't asked to be this offensive engine and carry such a big load night in, night out. He still gives you in terms of volume 22, 13, and 5 in the Minnesota years. And we have to contextualize the pace of play at this time and the fact that this was largely a defensively dominated league and that offensive production was just ugly, because I'll see people fucking do the stat head thing and it's like KG versus AD and it's just like, stop it. You have to understand how dramatically different the eras are and contextualize that when you're just comparing raw numbers. Like KG was second in the NBA in scoring in 2004, averaging just 24 points per game, because teams were just scoring a lot fewer points per game. But I think that's important when you look at the numbers with him. The volume is there. However, the turnovers were a bit of an issue, 3.5 turnovers a game, and the scoring efficiency drops to being, I mean, just barely above league average. And I think the issue that KG ran into in the playoffs was the lack of a real like strength, power-based game offensively. I talk about this a lot with him versus Tim Duncan because I mean, I would hear a case for KG over Tim Duncan. I would. I think KG is that good. But the reason that I lean on Duncan, and by a decent bit, although honestly they're still like pretty close, is because I do think Duncan's playoff offense held up better. And a big reason for that is just the ability to be physical out of the post, get to the free throw line, and consistently impose himself on the inside in that way. Whereas KG was maybe a little bit too reliant on the finesse game, and it didn't hold up as well in the playoffs. And then again, did have some turnover issues with that really big offensive load on his plate. But the reason I say even that is probably overstated is because the fucking Timberwolves were still 17 points better in terms of net rating with him on. So if they weren't fucking hemorrhaging points and just shitting themselves every second that he wasn't on the floor, like, I don't think people would even be as critical of that aspect of KG. And so I'm very high on him. I very much considered him versus the player in my 12 spot because I do think, like, in terms of the base level value he adds to a team, I would take KG. But there is a level of certainty in terms of playoff performance, playoff offense that I get from the other guy where I just narrowly land with him. But it's close, dude. It's really close. I could easily have KG higher than this, and I don't think I could have him any lower, which I don't know why I keep on ending up on the fucking low end of the spectrum with my beloved baby boys. I got fucking Chris Paul at 21. Maybe I could have had him higher. Maybe KG should be even higher than this, but I think he's become quite a divisive player because I think especially in the sort of data ball era, there's more of an appreciation for KG than ever before, whereas some other people are like, oh, but I didn't win a chip in Minnesota. And it's like, well, a lot of context there. Anyways, you have Jerry West at number 12, Logan. So I guess it comes back to me. And the player who I was mentioning, who I do think is very, very close with Kevin Garnett, is a contemporary of his.
Most divisive player, I think, ever. You want to talk about KG being divisive. I think this is the guy.
This probably is the guy. I have Kobe Bryant at number 12, and I know there are some people who will hear that and they'll scream in shock and horror. I really don't feel like I'm that low on Kobe. Now, I know that I am compared to some people because there are some people who literally think he's like the greatest player to ever play the game. There are some people who think he's a top 5 player. I also think there are some people who are lower on Kobe than I am, and I definitely think he's in a range where I could see him a few spots higher than this. But then again, I could also see an argument for Kevin Garnett above him. I could maybe see an argument for Jerry West above him. The longevity makes that hard. But like, I guess the thing with me is I more so feel like I'm high on everybody else here more than I'm like low on Kobe. But there are certain aspects of Kobe's resume that I'm not as high on as other people. The thing I'll start with is the 5 rings that people always bring up. He's a 5-time champion. But I think I've made it very clear throughout this series that there's just so much context that goes into team success, that goes into winning championships in a team sport, that I'm not just counting rings here, right? Like, I'm thinking about who I believe is the most impactful in a vacuum. And there's just a lot of context when it comes to Kobe's rings, and especially the fact that for the first 3 rings, he was playing alongside a player who was clearly better than him, and he was at one of the very highest peaks in NBA history. Like, it's just a fallacy that he and Shaq were 1A and 1B at that time. Shaq was clearly their best player, and by a good bit. From 2001 to 2004, which is the Kobe Shaq era for which we have this sort of granular data, shout out to Databaller for providing this, the Lakers were a plus 9.3 net team when both those guys were on the court. When Shaq was on without Kobe, they were a plus 4.5 net team. When Kobe was on without Shaq, they were a negative 3.3 net team. So dominant when they're on together, really good when Shaq is there without Kobe, bad when Kobe is on without Shaq. From 97 to 04, so this is their entire tenure together, when Shaq played in games without Kobe, he was 41-12, won 78% of those games. Kobe without Shaq won just 55% of his games. So when Shaq is on without Kobe, they're playing at a 63+ win pace. When Kobe plays without Shaq, they're playing at just a 45 win pace. Like, I just want to hammer that home. Shaq was undoubtedly the driving force on those teams. There's a reason he was nearly unanimous MVP. There's a reason that he was finals MVP 3 times in a row. It wasn't just about those big time performances. He was just flat out the most impactful player on the team. At his best, he was their best defensive player, and he was always their best offensive player. The level of defensive attention he demanded, the level of scoring value he provided on the interior, he was just unstoppable. And so it really is Shaq and then Kobe when you're looking at those teams. And Kobe was a great co-star, but this is why the 5 rings argument doesn't do it for me, just because, like, circumstances matter so much, and Kobe was extremely fortunate to be paired with one of the greatest players in NBA history, who was undoubtedly the best player on all those championship teams. The other thing that I immediately think of when it comes to Kobe and where I may differ with some people is I think he is certainly by accolades the most overrated defender in NBA history because he's a 12-time all-defense player, which is just absolutely insane. He did not deserve more than half of those selections. In the early 2000s, he was a really good defender, good length, good feet, high-level on-ball defender, really good athlete. After that, though, I really think Kobe was just fine defensively. He picked his spots. Makes sense because he had a big offensive load, but he gets treated like he's this all-time great defensive stopper, this all-time great two-way player, and I just don't think that's accurate. He just didn't have much defensive impact after the early 2000s. He was prone to lapses off ball, wasn't a very useful help defender, wasn't like a secondary rim protector like a Dwayne Wade of his era. Like Dwayne Wade was a much better defensive player overall, in my opinion, than Kobe Bryant. He wasn't like very switchable when it comes to guarding up on bigger players. And so from 2001 to 2013, again, these are the years in which we have this data, the Lakers' defenses were 1.5 points better with him off the court in terms of defensive rating. I'm not saying that he was a negative defensively. I'm just saying that doesn't happen over a 13-year sample with a high-impact defender. Kobe was not a high-impact defender over the course of his career. I still think he was a fantastic player, and I still think his scoring value, especially in the playoffs, is some of the best we've ever seen. I think he's one of the best offensive players we've ever seen, and one of the best players we've ever seen. Obviously, I have him at number 12, but I do think he needed more in place around him to lead to an elite team than the guys above him, than the like two-way giants, mostly big men, right, who are all-time defensive anchors and also awesome offensive players, or in one case, just a totally unique defensive player who we'll talk about later, or the tier one offensive engines. This is what I come back to with Kobe's offense. I think he was an extremely valuable offensive player. I think he's one of the greatest offensive players ever, but when you compare him to guys like Magic or Steph or Shaq or LeBron, like these players who have passed to hyper-efficient offense, the reality and the limitation with Kobe is just the fact that he lived off of a lot of really tough shots. And he could get to those shots in so many different ways, and his versatility and ability to be such an effective tough shot maker is part of why he remained as effective in the playoffs as he was in the regular season. But when it comes to just creating a path to hyper-efficient offense for yourself, if that's just a guy like Shaq or LeBron and that sort of interior scoring, right? Getting the most efficient shots in basketball at the rim at super high volume, or a Steph Curry who can manufacture layup efficiency from beyond the arc, and how those guys and their threats bend the defense because you have to dedicate so many bodies to Shaq in the paint just to keep him from getting the ball, because if he gets a deep catch, it's over for you, right? That's just insanely efficient offense. Or what Steph can do in the inverse way from the perimeter, constantly stressing you, forcing you to pull your defense way out, and then opening up so much in terms of the interior for his teammates. Like, those are just much easier paths to truly elite all-time offense. And I think that's why Steph and Shaq just had more of an offensive impact throughout their career, did more consistently lead to truly elite offenses. Kobe led to really good offenses too, but I just think there's a gap in terms of offensive impact between him and those guys who I mentioned. And then again, I'm not as high on his defense where I don't view him as a two-way giant. And so that's where I land a little bit lower on him. I also do think when you talk about being fortunate, like Kobe was fortunate in terms of the surroundings. Because of the Shaq years, obviously, I also think the 2009 and 2010 teams get criminally underrated. I think those were really good supporting casts too. I think what Kobe did in those runs was incredibly impressive. But overall in his career, from 2000 to 2013, the Lakers won 65% of their games with Kobe. Very good. They also won 60% of their games without him. And in his career, he just has a plus 4.6 on-off differential, which again is in that KD range. And I'm a little higher on Kobe than KD, but it does sort of tell a similar story of elite scoring value, but ultimately not being that top tier offensive player and not being a super impactful defensive player to offset some of the difference there. I feel like I have to start negative with Kobe just because I know that I'm lower on him than most, and I want to explain that. But I really don't view myself as being like a Kobe hater, because I think there is a lot to really appreciate about his game. I think some people fall in love with the aesthetics to the point where it like overrides the reality of the impact for them, because he's just so cool and so impressive to watch. But again, the goal of the game is not to make it look hard. It's to make it as easy as possible. It's to be as effective as possible. And that's where Kobe is the greatest difficult shot maker we've ever seen, but he's not the greatest scorer that we've ever seen. There are guys who just had easier paths to elite scoring, easier paths to elite offensive value. But what I find so impressive about Kobe's resume is what he did after Shaq from 2006 to 2010. Because even though I think his role, especially if you're looking like 2000, I don't think Kobe was fully matured yet at that point. It can get a little bit overrated what he did. At this point, when he is the guy on the team, he just becomes the best version of himself, especially offensively. And over these 5 years, does improve his team's net rating by 10 points across the regular season and the playoffs when he's on the court compared to off. It improves their offensive rating by 11 points. And there's just like some incredible moments, incredible seasons in here. 2006, of course, I mean, he averages 35 points per game. Like, that volume scoring is crazy. But the offensive impact, I mean, he improved their offensive rating by 20 points when he was on the court compared to off. It's just unthinkable how much he carried that offense with very limited talent around him. And then again, I really do like the talent he had around him from 2008 to 2010. Those are really good two-way teams with really good offensive players alongside him, like Pau Gasol and Lamar Odom, and really good defenders on the wings, and just a really nice supporting cast. But from 2006 to 2010, Kobe gives you in the playoffs 29.8 points per game on plus 3% relative true shooting. And this is where I do think his versatility is a superpower that you can't overlook. When people say, oh, Kobe wasn't efficient, I mean, he wasn't as efficient as some of the other all-time greats, but in the playoffs, the ability to maintain your efficiency is a superpower. And I think the reason that Kobe was able to do that so effectively is because he could score in so many different ways. And if you look at like his efficiency, considering play type, right? Because there are players who are asked to create everything for themselves, and then there are players who are play finishers. And obviously those two things are not equivalent. It's harder to create for yourself. Kobe was asked to create for himself at this massive volume and consistently out of isolation, out of pick and roll, out of the post. Like, he's scoring with better than 80th percentile efficiency in those play types. And so that does matter. I do think he had maybe the most counters of any player that we've ever seen. The footwork, the balance, the difficult shot making, all top tier. And I do think there are some aspects with Kobe that get underrated, at least by certain people. I think he was a really good off-ball scorer, and that level of activity and variety off-ball just made him and the team harder to guard, made him such an effective piece in the triangle offense. I also think, I mean, people who are low on Kobe, I think are very low on his passing. I actually think that Kobe was a pretty good passer. Now, obviously, he's not a very strong passer. Like, that would have made him a better offensive player, but I still think he was somebody who drew a ton of defensive attention and generally was pretty good at playing off of that attention. And yes, he took a lot of tough shots, maybe a few more tough shots than you would have liked, but I also think he did enhance his teammates offensively, maybe not as much as some other greats, but still in a way that did matter. Also, specifically, just like a really good drop-off passer. I think as a driver like Kobe, when it comes to those reads that he could see right in front of him, lay down passes, very good at that. So again, didn't have great vision and wasn't somebody who was constantly pressuring the basket, but somebody who drew a lot of double teams and did have a general awareness of how to take advantage of that. So I love the playoff scoring, and I think he was a really, really awesome offensive end, just not in my like tier one of all time. And his longevity is really good. 15 star level seasons out of Kobe Bryant. Like, that's just a rare thing to get. And so that's why I have him in the top 12 to end on a positive note. And that's where I did land on him, just barely above KG. Again, I know that that's a debate right now. Some people may think it's an absurd debate. For some people, it's a very real debate. Some people think KG clears Kobe, and Kobe was just way more lucky in terms of the circumstances. But I do think that playoff offense moves me with Kobe. I think it's so impressive that I do have to have him here. And I compare him to KD. Again, I already talked about why I prefer Kobe, but also I think you can say, okay, both of those guys at one point fell into a very fortunate situation. KD with the Warriors, well, he didn't fall into it. He stepped right into it. He chose it. But Kobe playing alongside Shaq, but then Kobe also climbed the mountain outside of that. And I don't think that's a coincidence, and I do think that's a testament to his greatness. So I know I'm not the highest on him, but I do still think Kobe was a hell of a player and deserving of a top 12 spot.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack with Kobe. I mean, to start, I agree with you on the rings point. I don't really care that he has 5. That like that's. I know a lot of old heads like to rest on that. I'm not a ring culture guy. I don't think the fact that Ben Roethlisberger has 2 Super Bowl rings automatically makes him a top 10 quarterback of all time. Just like the fact that Kobe winning 3 rings as a number 2. Doesn't automatically make him a top 10 guy. I do think that I agree with you on the supporting cast point about the later Lakers teams too. I think that Powell, that Odom, that Ariza, that I think those supporting casts can get underrated, especially just what Artest did on one of those teams, what Powell was as a player, how he fit, what Andrew Bynum was on those teams. Like, I think all of those guys can kind of get underrated. But I do think aspects of Kobe's game get underrated and overrated. Kobe was my favorite player as a kid too. I mean, Kobe got me hooked on basketball, his passion, his intensity. I mean, we all still yell. I speak for myself. We all still yell Kobe when I shoot anything into a trash can, man.
Well,
like
I
think
Kobe, Jimmer, but that works too.
I think Kobe is just one of the most culturally impactful players ever. When I think culture of basketball, I think Kobe, I think Allen Iverson. The guy's just transcendent. He is an icon. And so I think Kobe's legacy on the game is unprecedented. But we're ranking winning impact. And winning impact is where I come away at number 11. You already touched on all these things, so I don't want to beat any dead horses. But on the individual skill sets, I agree with you. I think he is overrated as a defender. I think the accolades overrate him in that department. I think some of his actual skills can kind of get underrated by some people. The scoring skill set, where you're talking about he's one of the most difficult shot makers of all time. I think he can get overrated as in terms of efficiency, but I think that Kobe can kind of get underrated in terms of it translating to the playoffs. I also think he can get underrated in terms of, like you're saying, him playing a role alongside other great players and as a playmaker. Like, I think that if in that period where post-Shaq, pre-Gasol, those teams, if you had given Kobe another co-star in those eras, there's no doubt in my mind that Kobe could have been First of all, I think his playmaking numbers get underrated. Like, I do think he was a good playmaker. I think if you had given him another legitimate co-star in that era, I think Kobe could have been a better playmaker. I think the reason that Kobe doesn't have better passing and assist per game numbers, I don't think he respected any of the guys on his team. I think that's why he put up so many of his shots. Like
Mamba.
He frankly said that. Why am I going to pass the ball to Smush Parker? You're not. I'm Kobe. Like, if Kobe respected you, he was going to get the rock to you. If he didn't, he wasn't. He was going to put up those shots himself. But I agree with you fundamentally with the point that you made about both ends of the floor. I think defensively there are guys that single-handedly could propel their defenses to higher heights than Kobe. I think offensively there are a lot of guys that could propel their teams to higher heights offensively than Kobe. And that is where I just couldn't have him crack the top 10. I think this is the perfect spot for him, man. Like, I really do. I think 11 to 12. Honestly, I consider Jerry above Kobe more than I did a guy like KG. That was a tougher dilemma. But KG, I don't think, doesn't belong in these arguments. Like, I think you could make that case. I won't. I think Kobe's skill set's a little bit more valuable, what he could do offensively for you in the playoffs. But if you wanted to make that argument, I couldn't push back too much. I think that Kobe is in this same range of player. But yeah, there are just 10 names that I think impacted the game more in terms of winning. This is not a negative Kobe argument. Kobe was my favorite player growing up. He made me fall in love with the game more than any other player in NBA history. His intensity, his passion, how can you not? It permeated through the screen how much Kobe loved the game, and I think we can all kind of take away and see ourselves in that way. Like, just loving the game. Kobe loved the game the way we did, and I think he hooked a lot of young hoopers on basketball. But in terms of winning impact, I think this is the exact right range for Kobe.
I think you hit the nail on the head when you said there's just 10 names you like more. For me, there's just 11 names that I like more. There's just a top tier of impact that I don't think Kobe can quite reach. But I do think because the longevity is so strong, there is an argument for him a few spots higher than this. I personally see zero case for Kobe as a top 5 player like some people will make, but I do think there are obvious reasons that Kobe is sort of celebrated in the way that he is. And I mean, when it comes to the KG debate, it's like they just stand on such sort of polar opposite ends of what they do for a basketball team and how their individual impact does not match up with the team success that they had, right? Like, The goal is to win championship. My criteria is which player gives me the best chance to win the most championships. Oh, Kobe has 5, KG has 1, but it's like, it's a team accomplishment. What I'm valuing is how that individual player impacts their team's chance of getting it done, whether or not their team actually gets it done. Like, so much of that is dependent on circumstance. And that's where I think, because of the Lakers and the championships and the fact that, I mean, obviously the scoring and the aesthetics of the scoring, all these things, I think for a lot of people put Kobe into a different tier from KG. I don't view them that way at all. And a lot of that is I am really high on KG and really high on a lot of these other players who we are going to get into next episode, Logan. So that was actually like very similar overall. We had the exact same names in the 20 to 11 range, different order, but that means we are going to have the exact same names in the top 10, which is very interesting. Before we wrap this one up though, Logan, why don't you recap who you did have from 20 to 11?
Affirmative, Mr. Breber.
Thank you, sir.
Number 20, Dr. J. Number 19, the Greek Freak, Giannis Antetokounmpo. Number 18, the Joker, Nikola Jokic. Number 17, the Big O, Oscar Robertson. Number 16, the Slim Reaper, Kevin Durant. Number 15, German Jesus, Dirk Nowitzki. Number 14, I don't know what the hell they called Wilt Chamberlain, the guy who...
Wilt the Stilt.
Wilt the Stilt, my fault.
It's a great
playa.
nickname.
It is a great nickname. Number 13, the Big Ticket, Kevin Garnett. Number 12, the Wolf, Jerry West. Number 11, the Black Mamba, Kobe Bryant.
The Wolf? What about Zeke from Cabin Creek?
Bro, did they just... I wanted to ask you on that. I saw that when we were researching. Did they just call everybody Zeke back in the day,
Zeke.
man?
Everybody was
that?
Zeke and Clyde back in the day. No, I don't know. I don't know why he was called Zeke. I think it might be a reference to something. Or maybe they were just like, that's a hick name. Hicks are named Zeke. I don't know. Let's see what the origin story is there. But he was from Cabin Creek. I know that.
It just seemed like a lot more popular, I guess, back then.
Yeah.
The prophet Ezekiel?
Zeke was a slang term often used by sports writers as a lighthearted and sometimes mildly derisive shorthand for country boy or hick, according to the almighty AI overview. So there you have it. Shout out to our AI overlords and the AI overview. My voice is gone, but it was worth it to spend almost 3 hours once again talking about these legendary NBA players. I know I'm going to do mine.
Yep.
I'm going to do mine, Logan. If I forgot, I know that I would be punished for that. At number 20, I had Dr. J as well. Number 19, Giannis Antetokounmpo. Number 18, Dirk Nowitzki. 17, Oscar Robertson. 16, Nikola Jokic. 15, Kevin Durant. 14, Jerry West. 13, Kevin Garnett. 12, Kobe Bryant. And number 11, Wilt the Stilt Chamberlain. We are into the top 10, Logan. I will say, and I say this about a lot of lists, I wish we could just expand the top 10. I wish the top 10 could be like 14, 15.
That's cool.
Wouldn't that be nice?
You know, Carson, one of these days we're going to do our NBA top 1,000 players.
That sounds so
And it's going
fun.
to be 3,000 hours
oh my
totally,
God.
total, maybe that length. It's going to be awesome.
Can we get Tom Borwinkle in there? Do you think he cracks the
Maybe.
top 1,000?
I think Tom Burleson, maybe we can get him in there.
Ooh, the Newland Needle. Holy crap. I don't know that he's making the top 1,000, but
Maybe Mike
Logan.
Mitchell. Maybe Mike Mitchell.
I think Mike Mitchell is making
Austin
the top
Carr,
1,000.
maybe?
I think Mike Newland is making the top 1,000. I think Austin Carr is making the top 1,000. This is just off the top of my head.
Mm-hmm. Can we get Kirk Heinrich in there? Any love?
Kirk Heinrich, I think, makes a decent case. I'll tell you who's definitely in there is Steven Adams. Like, he's a lock. He's a lock. Yeah, I guess it's only a matter of time. I mean, we rank everything.
Mm-hmm.
And there comes a point where it's like top 50. It's just not enough. You know, it's like Fent. You need a little more. Then you need a little more the next time. You know what I'm talking about here.
Maybe not exactly. Yeah, I get what you're getting at. Yeah, sure.
It's an addiction. We have an addiction to making lists. And at some point, and we have an addiction to doing really long podcasts. The lists have to keep getting bigger and more obscure, and the podcasts have to keep getting longer. And we just hope you guys will stick it out with us, because there's a real world here where we are just screaming into the void for 3 hours at a time for many, many years. And you know what? It doesn't sound bad to me, Logan. That life with you, I could live with that. I could live and die a happy man knowing that that's what I spent my time doing, debating Mickey Johnson versus fucking Marcus Johnson with you. Marcus Johnson takes that one. We all know that.
Easy.
Yeah. Shout out Mickey Johnson, though. One of the old playmaking forwards, Logan. All right. I think we've done enough if we're talking about Mickey Johnson now. Appreciate you guys We will see you all for the top 10. But before then, we have a couple fun episodes coming out. You also can listen to the trivia episode that we already did with the State of the League guys this Monday, and you can listen to all the trivia episodes we've done this summer so far. You can listen to all of the installments of this Top 50 Players in NBA History series if you haven't already, and stay tuned for more coming soon. So with that, as always, we appreciate you guys. You know where to find us on all platforms. And with that, I've been Carson Brabber.
I have been Logan Camden.
And this was Nerd Sesh.